Rise, say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Let's go ahead and begin with the investment policies, old business. I'm sorry, meeting minutes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Do I have a motion to approve the 3 meeting minutes that were?
I haven't got a chance to read them, so we can put that out to a little later. I just like to go, I'll find a way to fumble through them.
Shouldn't be an issue if you're okay with it. We'll just table to the next meeting, so you're not.
That's fine. We're trying to fix my tablet so I can read these things in advance. I couldn't read any documents before tonight,
Oh, okay.
so we're trying.
All right. So yeah, let's just table it so you have time to think through it. All right. Then I guess if you're okay with it, are we good to start with the old business, or?
Well, actually, both things on that I have listed on the new business, I'm just gonna ask to carry that. It's ongoing stuff.
Oh, the two policies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Still working with the various people involved in that to kind of square everything away, but I want to keep that rolling on the agenda. So
Gotcha.
I didn't forget about it.
All right then. The presentation of tax collector treasurer candidates.
So, have the notice, or the letter from me representing the screening committee. We brought in, we had 11 applicants, we brought in requested interviews from 6 individuals. We ended up interviewing 5, one person didn't call back for the interview. But the list of people presented to you in order are the people that we feel would be the best candidates to interview in the next round.
Is that listed in your preference priority-wise?
Correct, yes.
Okay. I'm reading and listening.
The only question I would have, are you aware of any previous relationships of the 3 candidates to any of the people that were on the finance team that did the interviewing?
And aware of any relationships, prior relationships with any of the people? No.
Okay. We want to go through our usual department head interview process for the last 3 gentlemen? Okay. So we should either set a date that works best for all, or see if you can come up with some 22nd. I know that's on the schedule, but I didn't.
When we interviewed the candidates, we basically told them that was going to be because when we had talked about it the last time, we said that this is the process, and moving forward, this will be the date. So they were aware that if they were selected, that would be the timeline.
Okay, and that
For
would
meeting
be
department heads, not for a meeting with us, or for meeting with us?
no, the meeting with us.
Meeting with
Us, okay.
Yes.
So you're
Yeah.
trying to get them to meet department heads before that?
No, I meant our interviewing of department head.
Okay,
You know,
all right.
like you said, defer to the department heads when it's below them, but when it's department heads, we get involved with the
I just
last.
recall we had Andrew,
Yep.
you had those candidates meet all the department heads, but
Yeah.
different scenario, that's fine.
Okay. So, next Monday it is. And thank you very much for you as well as the finance team taking the time to go through that and present 3 good candidates.
Yes.
So I believe you have a recommendation for an interim treasurer collector?
Well, I talked with Nancy Talbot about creating a transition plan to basically kind of bridge the gap between her planned retirement on Thursday and when we can get a new person started and situated. We figured that if we hold our interviews next Monday, you guys would have to still negotiate a salary that would maybe put it off a week at the most. That person would have to give another 2 weeks notice. So we're talking about probably 3 weeks until that person starts. We talked about kind of how we were going to bridge that gap, and so originally we talked, I had thought about appointing a interim other than Nancy. The only downside is there's the amount of paperwork involved, or the amount of processes that have her name on it that need to be transferred over. It takes about 3 weeks in order to do it, because that's when she first came on. There was a transition period that took 3 weeks in order to get it, and that was a smooth transition. If we were to appoint an interim, it would be that same 3 weeks, and then bring in somebody else, and then another 3 weeks after that. So we felt it might be better to come up with an agreement between the town and her to keep her on in, basically in a functioning role on a part-time basis to bridge that gap. So I presented you guys a draft agreement, basically what she'd be asking for to bridge that gap.
So you've had this discussion with her, this is what she's agreeable to already?
Yes.
I read it, I think it's fair. I like it.
I agreed. The only thing I mentioned in response to Andrew only, obviously, because the emails, we don't share thoughts, is that we need to look at a cap, so not to exceed a certain number.
It's in there.
It was? I missed
Yeah.
that. So I'm glad he just cleared it up for me.
10,000. You put a cap in.
Okay. Thank you.
I like that too. But it's smarter to keep her on than to bring someone else in and try to transition someone. We're on a short timeline to have this done. So to keep her going, if she's willing to do so, we're lucky she is. And very grateful to her for doing so.
I am also. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, they just push ahead, I guess. And I agree with the
Okay.
contract options, haven't read it. So,
All right. Do we want to make a motion on that? Do we have further, anybody in the public have any questions on that? It's really just a transition to help us pass on information, institutional knowledge, as well as keep the town running until the next person is, of course, all the names are on the right accounts, et cetera, so they have proper control over our town funds.
Well, I make a motion to offer this interim contract to Nancy so that we can keep her on until we have somebody full-time in place.
second.
It's written.
Call for a vote?
Aye.
Aye. So. I'm going to jump up to the Create a Local Commission on Disabilities just quickly, just to explain. I received a letter, and I was actually prior to last meeting, but I just didn't have a chance to really bring it up formally under correspondence, from the state. I think it's the Commission on Disabilities, asking if the town was interested in creating a local Commission on Disabilities that would have your ADA coordinator, et cetera, assigned, and it actually gives them a little strength and recommendations on where we should spend funds to help bring public facilities, or even suggestions for non-public facilities up to ADA and MAAB accessibility requirements. They may be outdated, they may be grandfathered, but generally it's kind of a local commission that goes through, identifies certain shortcomings. Many times it's actually created from those that may have certain disabilities so that they can give you a better perspective of what they're going through. Sometimes they might even advise something that's a little beyond what the written requirements are, based on their understanding of the true limitations they have to go through to access certain buildings. Right now, obviously, if we did that, it would be a recommendation that we'd have to do that again through another volunteer committee. I'm just bringing it up in case the board is interested. I think the other development of this also is it opens us up to more state grant opportunities under the same general topic. Do you have anything to add, Andrew, on that?
No, I just provided you guys an outline as far as how we would have to adopt it. We'd actually have to go to town meeting before we could formally start a commission. So it would be the adoption of MGL 48J. Once that's done, then the accountant would set up a account under that law, and then we would appoint a commission of between 5 and 13 members.
Okay.
But it looks in a positive way as long as you get people to serve on the commission.
So, are we interested in asking Andrew to kind of post some feelers maybe on the website or the Facebook to see if people are interested in being part of this, to take the next steps to find out if it's even worth bringing before the town? Truth is, I don't want to create something that nobody wants to sit on. Right now, we are having trouble filling other boards and committees already, so I'd like to get some feelers before we go through all the process of putting it on a warrant and going through all these steps. But I'm open to
Yeah, I
thoughts.
think putting it on the town website, seeing if there's some interest. If there is, then maybe we could move forward on it and come up with
Okay.
some plans with it. I think would be the best and the most realistic.
Yeah, obviously the town's made strides, and we do have an elevator here, we have ramps in other places, and we make an attempt, but we don't live that every day, so I would be surprised if we didn't get people to volunteer. That it's going to affect people that need those services, that need the handicap accessible things, and they'll have a much better idea on where we fall short. So I think putting it out to feelers is a great idea, and if we get a quick response, we could certainly consider even adding it to this warrant. I mean, this might be too late. I don't know.
Yeah.
Certainly for the annual town meeting, I'd like to see it get it going. Most things you need to do to modify for accessibility aren't overwhelmingly expensive, but to have someone, you know, that's on that side of it that needs the accessibility, it'd be much better to have their input. So I think putting the feelers out is a great idea, and if they have the interest through the committee, it'll serve us well.
Can you post this also? One of the things it says here is the Commission on Disabilities may have from 5 to 13 members, so we are looking for a minimum of 5, but as many as those that want to be a part of it, up to 13 would definitely be appreciated, because then it's not limited to the 5 to do all the work necessary. You can kind of balance it out and share some of the load. So, all right.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I would also, I guess we'll move to the marijuana bylaw discussions. Have you guys had a chance to look at, I know it just came out at the last minute, the marijuana bylaw draft that Andrew sent out. I did run through it pretty quickly. I had a couple things, a couple comments myself, but I didn't know if you guys really had a chance to get into it much, or obviously I don't think anything. Today's the end of the discussion.
I skimmed about 70% of it sitting here, but it looks good. I haven't got to really sit down and try to look for concerns or loopholes. This is generally, I like what it says. There's a few things that were included that I was happy to see. Good solid starting point, if not 90% done, I would think. Although, but I want to read more.
Do you have any thoughts, or are you still trying to catch up?
Well, I've been through it just real quick like at this point, but I'd like a little more time.
Okay.
And
I've got a couple items I noticed that, again, I'm not saying these aren't major, these are just, one question is, do you believe fitting into this or a separate bylaw is appropriate for us to identify the HCA process?
So that's where I was kind of going back and forth on. I tried to identify in here, basically that it was required to go through the process to have an HCA. But I was wondering whether or not it might be better off to have the HCA process itself as a policy, just because then if there's one thing that may be applicable to one applicant that's not applicable to another, you have that option of saying, well, we're just going, we're not going to go after it for certain reasons, rather than saying that, well, we're in violation of a bylaw if we don't address it.
The only thing I thought was important to put into the bylaw is something that's more about making sure the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board are held accountable. So, and as part of the discussions we've had with the Planning Board, I wanted to lock into the bylaw some of the agreements we were talking about. So one would be a minimum of 2 public hearings that the Board of Selectmen would hold to make sure the public has a chance to have their input made. Second was to identify the process on any of the items that we mentioned may normally fall under a special permit granting authority under the planning board. We were talking about moving some of those to the HCA process so that the businesses would have a better understanding of the expectation when they went before the planning board. So these would be more generic statements saying you will do this, you will do that, you won't do that, depending on the neighborhood you go to. The means and methods still can be developed and reviewed by the planning board at the time plans are submitted, but the general intent should be known so the business requesting knows what they're getting into. The concept of that was also to have the 5-member planning board and 3-member board of selectmen vote on all of those site-specific items. That's 8 members. If for any reason we're locked 4-4, the associate planning member would be the tiebreaker. That's generally what I was discussing. So I think that would be something we want to put in there, because that kind of, because it's a bylaw, not a policy, it keeps the 2 boards knowing that they're accountable to each other. If it was just a policy, the policy would fall under the Board of Selectmen, and the board could always change it later, which would slightly undermine the intent of our negotiations and working with the planning board to develop these bylaws.
I disagree, because when we're going through the joint boards, I agree having this host agreement listed here, and I'd stipulate in saying the joint boards have to agree on this by vote to approve it. That gives them the chance to make sure that we didn't slip outside on a host agreement. Like Andrew said, keeping the host agreement as a policy, we can say in the policy we would discuss, as we said, the proximity to these following locations would be considered in the host agreement. We can write those things in the policy, and now they're things we're allowed to consider because we put them in, but we don't have to.
Oh, I don't disagree
So
there. That
keep-
list
I
of
keep-
items,
and
policy.
And then when we create that host agreement, it comes back to here that says we have to get approval from the board. So if we do something, we slip out some of the things we promised to pick up, that simple adding the joint vote in here covers them without getting too cumbersome in the language of the law, because I think overriding this stuff is a bad idea. Just putting their clearance here assures that what you're asking for is taken care of.
I agree with you on that. Maybe I, in the intent to explain what I was trying to say, I made it sound like I was putting too much into the bylaw. It was more about just making sure we had the 2 public meetings,
Yeah,
2
and
public
I
hearings,
want that here.
and how the planning board and board of selectmen will vote together, joint
Yeah,
vote.
Those 2 things.
That's
I agree.
it, and then everything else I agree should be dropped down into policy so we can amend as necessary to
We can add
address.
those 2 items into section D under the host agreement as you have it.
I think actually, maybe, is it section point, whatever, section .5A would be under general, and then section 2, which says the marijuana shall execute and maintain a host community agreement with the town, within the town in
Yep,
conformity, and then putting in there,
like 2A, 2B.
yeah, exactly.
I think it would be easy to slip it right in there.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I think it's easy to do, but when we started getting into, see if I get this right. Operational requirements. And if I, well, in general across the board, but specifically operational requirements, we need to be careful when we make a statement of all marijuana establishments licensed operations shall be conducted within a building or fixed structure. Only because what it's doing right there is it's excluding outdoor cultivation.
Right.
And so we need to, in my opinion, we need to make sure we address certain operational requirements specific to outdoor, and then everything else can fall under probably the same general requirements.
Okay, so we'll just put in an exemption for outdoor cultivation.
Right, and I think we may also need to clearly identify that outdoor cultivation also requires a license, because I think most of our licensing here speaks to delivery or retail. And I would like cultivation and processing to fall into that also, so minor, and again, if you can throw those into
So
a
section-
draft.
Yeah, that point, section dash .4 caps on number of board licenses, where we just have storefront delivery. Actually, no, that's on the cap. I'll have to put that in somewhere else.
But also regarding licensing, I think for like cultivation, we probably should discuss as a board, but I don't think we need to limit that necessarily to 1 each, but we may want to look at, we could start as 1 each for testing it out in the town, like, you know, we already have 1 indoor that's got an HCA, a provisional license, working towards their steps to be, you know, get going. I know there's interest in outdoor. That may also be something where it's good to have a test the first time, and then we can change the licensing. We need to identify if that change in the number of licensing is something that should be based on town vote bylaw amendment moving forward, or if we would reference to the Board of Selectmen, again, back to policy. I'm willing to just listen to thoughts on that. I don't know what your thoughts
If the
are.
number is part of the zoning bylaw, then obviously we'd need the town vote to change it anyways.
Well, a minimum of, but can be increased based on Board of Selectmen vote, would allow that. But I do think if we're gonna do something like that, it would be one, but the Board of Selectmen cannot increase it within 1 or 2 years of the first one being established. In other words, Board of Selectmen can't raise it unless we've already had a year or two to figure out how it affects the town. It's the only reason I bring it up, but I have no problem if it's gotta go back to a,
I'd rather go back to a
Town.
vote. I think we're splitting hairs when we might get hung up at the state if we try to give ourselves the right to change a number later after a town vote. I don't like anything being changed after a town vote puts it in.
Okay.
Without the town vote changing. That's just always been my personal feeling, so. If it goes in at a town vote at 1, I wanna see it changed by town vote. That's my preference.
works for me.
It's
That's
up
why
to
I
you
just
guys.
figured I'd ask to see what
But
the thoughts
outdoor
were.
cultivation scares the heck out of me. I don't like it.
Understood.
Indoor, there's a lot more protections. Outdoor, I have much more concerns for it, so I think I'm gonna limit that to 1 period, until it has some history to see how it's worked out.
Okay. But it's just things I thought we needed to just discuss, clear up, so that when and if it's in the bylaw and we're not like, oh, I wish I had said something, because then it just leaves it open.
I always amend them, but this is a good solid start for this, and as the zoning board's gonna have, if we're not right where we wanna be, we're gonna be 90% there, so we can feel comfortable putting solid, good functional laws in place at this meeting, which was our goal.
Yeah.
Not to mean they won't need amendment later, and any law usually gets tweaked at some point, but I'm glad we're gonna be offering something up now, instead of moratoriums.
And just to reiterate something I had mentioned at the last meeting, the zoning bylaws associated with marijuana require a 2/3 vote. After a certain period of time, you cannot continue moratoriums because you didn't get a 2/3 vote, because it's prohibition by default. So no matter what, if the town wants a bylaw on this and have some type of regulatory control, people are gonna have to come together and recognize what's truly important versus what is something you may need to just learn to live with or work with. Otherwise, eventually you'll have no bylaw, no moratorium, and therefore no regulation. Because both sides need to agree, and right now, on town meeting floor, these items have been almost 50-50, no matter what vote you take. So, to sway enough voters from one side of the aisle to the other to get yourself a 2/3 vote, you're gonna have to figure out what's important to you and see if you can do it. Otherwise, you will have absolutely no regulation outside of what we can put into the licensing side, which does not allow any site regulation. So it's a whole different story there. And we can only incorporate that assuming we actually get a zoning bylaw. Otherwise, during the HCA, we're gonna be very limited in what we can talk about regarding site-specific concerns. Because the state does not want the Board of Selectmen having that type of control on what goes in their town. So they're not gonna let us just arbitrarily do it if we don't have some guidance from a zoning bylaw to help direct how we do that. They'll just cut it right out, and then we'll have no laws and no licensing requirement, and it just comes down to the HCA process and what the state says. So I'm just trying to put it out there so people truly understand that it's not all or nothing. It's some or nothing. Most people aren't gonna get all of what they want in this, and you've gotta really start to pay attention what's important, or we're gonna lose our opportunity. And I think we're this close away from the state saying you can't do any more moratoriums either, because the Cannabis Commission has set their rules in place, and there's no more I'm waiting for the state to determine what the rules are. So eventually they're gonna cut off moratoriums because, just like I said, it's a de facto prohibition. And we didn't win the votes to prohibit retail stores in town. So we're not gonna be able to continue that. So I'm not saying it's this meeting, but I'm betting by next spring, the annual town meeting, the state's pretty much gonna say you can't do another moratorium. And so I think we need to really pay attention, get involved, speak to your planning board, speak to your board of selectmen, state your case, and recognize that this is gonna have to be two differing opinions coming to an agreement that, well, that's government. You either do it or you don't, but you either have regulations or you don't. I don't know if anybody, but we gotta find a common ground or we get nothing. Yes, Claire?
Didn't you at one time say we were gonna put the bylaw on the ballot, on the warrant? But if it didn't pass, we could continue, put the moratorium on for like 6 months?
We had discussed
We
that.
discussed that, yep.
I wasn't a proponent of it this time because I believe we've had a year and a half now to put together a bylaw, and we haven't done it.
I also feel that now that I've sat down and we had a good meeting a week or so ago to go through the bylaws, they're very reasonable. They should be restricted enough to make most people happy with them. They're way more restrictive than the state. But they certainly are permissive enough that we can get going with operations of all types in town for people that want to do it. It's a fair bylaw, it's a good offer, it's a good middle-of-the-road offer, and I'm going to be in favor of removing the moratorium from the warrant so it's not available. People are going to have to accept this law as we put it through now. We're going to just default to state rule. And I don't think that's the best interest of our town, but I don't think we should keep continuing the moratorium, because what's traditionally happening is the 50% of people who just don't want marijuana say, I'm going to vote against any bylaw because it keeps the moratorium which bans it. And that's not right. And they've had that comfort for a while. The rules, the laws here that are created, I think, are very fair and reasonable, and they've got a lot of effort into it, and I think it's time to vote on it and talk about it. And if that means we have a discussion in town floor for an hour, we'll have a discussion for an hour. But I think people will come around and realize it's a good law, and we can always modify it as we need to. But it's time to make the bylaw.
You've got to make sure that you get that bylaw out to the people before the town meeting.
That's the goal.
You have to make sure everybody,
I would expect it.
They have to have a public hearing, I believe, for it anyway.
yeah.
I expect it will be out probably in 2 or 3 weeks. I think they'll. I would be surprised if it's not out within the month, but I think it's close.
Because
Taking some off their plate for this and a host
a
agreement.
lot of people don't go on to the website, even if you think they do, they don't.
No.
I
How do you
talk
get the
a
word
lot
out
of
to
people.
those?
Only thing I can think of is mail. Even if you have them somewhere, there are gonna be people that won't, they can't.
Can
get
you
out
look into the
there.
cost of a mailing?
You know, mailing would be the only thing that I would think.
Sam?
You know, in the interest of fairness, maybe the newspaper will give the town of Barry a place to put a piece of paper in each issue, sharing this with everybody. I'm sure that if the town provided the material, I'm sure that the newspaper might, I mean, I'm not talking to the newspaper, but I'm just guessing, something as important as this, it might be good to send it around to everybody who buys a paper.
Well, we can discuss what it would cost to have them post an extra couple pages.
It still limits the audience we
Yeah,
get.
people do not
currently.
buy Barry Gazette all the time.
Now,
There's
the
a lot
truth
of
right
people
now
who
is,
don't.
there's no one place that the entire town goes to. It's gonna be Facebook, it's gonna be the website, it's gonna be newspaper, it's gonna be word of mouth.
I think a combination of avenues is
So-
best.
I do agree we need to try to use all those avenues to get it out as much as possible. I would also suggest that the biggest part here is gonna be word of mouth. if you go on the website of the Facebook, Claire, and you happen to see that it's been posted, you gotta tell everybody you know that. And if someone goes, you know,
Quickly.
and they read the newspaper, and the newspaper states that a draft bylaw or a final version of the bylaw to be presented at special town meeting is available at the town administrator's office, then people can go there. The best we can do, though, is, I'm saying, is that. And like I said, we'll see what it costs to do a mailing. If a mailing is something that we can financially afford, then I agree. But I don't know if we can do a mailing that will give the whole bylaw, but it might state that it's ready and available at the town administrator's office, because it's a difference between 1 sheet and maybe 5 sheets. And the cost to print would add up if we go beyond that. So I would be suggesting the cost just for a quick little letter that says, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, and this is where you can get a copy of it in preparation of.
The bulk mailing.
So it'll add up.
If you only sent it to registered voters too,
Yeah.
because other voters can't go in anyway.
Well, that might be, it's registered voters or actually just households. You may find that multiple registered voters at one house don't need a letter, but the household does. But the town clerk is very familiar with that process, I'm sure, so can help us identify how to hit the population the best. And kind of what Greg was talking about the marijuana bylaw that the planning board's working on, and the concept of it seems fair and reasonable, and that some of the restrictions have been requested, and it sounds like the planning board is looking to pull some of them, reduce some of them, talk about some of them. We've had good discussions with them, but they've also carried forward on their own, and it is their board, and they've got to make their own decisions. So it's not like they made a vote when we left saying this is what we're gonna do. So it's based on a good feeling that we had during the conversation. Here's the thing I think people need to pay attention to on the angle here when it comes to getting a bylaw passed, and those that support having some regulation, and those that want complete zero regulation beyond what the state has required and are more interested in kind of land rights or business rights, or in other words, more like libertarian conservative concepts versus more social democratic concepts and all of that. I don't want to get into political, I'm just saying it's two different perspectives. Those that don't want any regulation are the ones you need to win over. So you got to think about the type of regulations you're asking, because you need 2/3 of a vote. If you can't get enough of them to accept the type of regulation you're asking, you're going to get zero regulation, because you'll never get a bylaw passed. So you got to think of it in reverse there. It's not that it's a nice bylaw and those that want regulation think it's fair. It's what do the people that don't want regulation think is fair, and how many of them can you get to agree? And so I'm just bringing it out because we can talk here at the board and we can have our thoughts. We can talk on town meeting floor, but what I suggest right now is the two different groups start talking before we even get there, and working with the planning board and saying, hey, what's considered a fair balance? And try to work towards that before we get to the meeting. Otherwise, you're going to go in, you're going to be blindsided, and you're going to realize you got to give up probably everything you thought was important because you couldn't identify the important and work through. So I'm just bringing it up. It's not easy, but I don't want to lose any regulation. I think there's necessary steps for certain regulations we want, but outside of the state rules, that's all we'll have if we don't find something that works, and you can get at least, I don't know, less than 50% of those that are on the other side to come over your way. You probably got to win, what, 35% of them to actually get to your 2/3 vote.
Tell me, is there something wrong with the state rules? The people who have made the state rules get paid and are a lot more educated than you and I. And why does a town have to micromanage rules that are established by people who may be a lot more focused in that area than we are. And maybe we should be focusing on something else in life instead of, and I know marijuana is a very important issue for lots of people, but I think we should be focusing on, instead of regulating something, is to think about how we can use whatever we have to generate revenue. And we haven't been talking about revenue here. So I guess the question is that why can't we just use the state rules and not worry about modifying them?
Yeah. Part of what this is about is revenue. It gives us the opportunity in the host agreement to discuss revenue. Without that agreement, without the bylaws set by the zoning to say where it's gonna be, there's very little we're gonna get out of revenue because of the state. There's very little control we can put these establishments in our own community. I think the people of Barry know better where we want these things to occur in Barry. And this is our chance to make sure we take care of that. What we want the business to look like, signage to look like, size of it to look like, hours of operation to be. All these things are what we get to fine tune that fits our community. Worcester might want to have a 24-hour pot shop. I don't think we do in Barry. Okay? And if we want to ask for in our host agreement, we can address, percentages for taxation and other things. If we don't get agreements down, we can't ask for that, and we'll have no revenue out of this. There's, I think, a lot of demand around. There's a lot of people that like marijuana. Obviously, 50% of the towns voted for it. I think it's a revenue stream that's going to be good for the business that opens in town, and therefore, the tax-wise, be good for the town. But this all relies on us having some regulation that we put forward. We lose our ability to have any say in it, and we're just bystanders watching what happens with no gain for the town and possibly detriment to the town, depending where these shops set up without our say. And the number of shops, the state says 20% minimum. The state doesn't limit how many you can have. I don't want 100 marijuana shops in Barry. And anyone who gets a license, they don't want 99 other shops competing with them. So it also sets up a fair market by having us have some control in zoning bylaws. There's so many things that's important about it. We can't even get into them all here, but trust me, it's very important that we have say in what happens in the business in our town, especially regarding something that is a drug-related business. I hope that answers your question.
Hey, Sneaker.
One other thing to remember is that the state regulations were set with mostly cities in mind, and so when they say a distance from a school, there's not very much distance between city schools. Whereas when you talk within the communities out here, you say it has to be a certain distance from a school, that still leaves a large part of our downtown area that is available. And those areas still have the basketball courts where the kids go and play. They still have childcare. They still have the churches and other things like that where kids do congregate. So including where kids congregate as to where we don't want shops near is really important, because if you look at a city, you take out a large chunk of that area by saying not near a school. We can't, by just saying schools, we're not taking out a lot of the town where kids are.
Proximity to maybe a dozen different types of locations have been identified that are covered between the host agreement and the zoning bylaws that we're proposing and supporting. And once again, without these, they go wherever they want.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question.
So,
I'm sure more than you have that concern, so I'm glad we get to address it.
so I'm gonna, we got meetings galore this week. We got one every night.
Meetings
But
until December,
if
right?
I'm correct, tomorrow's the next planning board meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's the one I was thinking I had, unless there's another one that I have, because I know that I just looked at the calendar and I was like, loaded. We got one economic development,
Wednesday.
one QEMP on Thursday. So I think yesterday I was looking at the planning board meeting. I'm gonna try to make that myself, so we didn't post that, did we? Did you wanna go to that? Because if so, I can defer and let.
No, you go ahead. I was happy with my involvement in the last one.
I might want to go, I don't know. But if it gets real awkward with the posting issue, then,
If you would like to go ahead and go. Just let Andrew know when you know you're gonna go. But if you're certain you can't go or something,
Yeah.
you gotta, because then Andrew can tell me not, that way we don't both show up at a non-posted
Yeah.
meeting.
As long as.
I'll go otherwise, but if,
yeah, because it is a
Um,
busy week.
See what they made for changes as to what we talked about last time. I think they had a short list of things they really wanted to change. And I would bet they've hammered some things out for this one.
yeah, and see if we should plan to have another joint meeting, and when they think they might be ready for that, for us to bring our two different bylaws, the general bylaws from our board, the zoning bylaws from theirs, and sit down and review it all together and say, it's cohesive, it works, it's what the intent was to work the two boards together.
And also.
I would like to do that with enough time to meet again if we have to, after changes are made based on that discussion, so,
And we should try to draft a policy for the HCA,
yeah.
so they can see the assurance that we are gonna consider those things in the HCA and create that policy. And explain to them why it's gonna be a policy instead of part of the bylaw, and assure them that they're gonna have the right in that section D, I think it was,
Is that
to
something
vote on it.
you would like to do, at least bullet it, or no? I mean, I can work on something, I'm just trying to see how we wanna do
I'm
it,
gonna
because
have
he's
to-
also buried with
I'm gonna have
lots.
to say no for now, because so far I can't do anything with my tablet for keeping involved in these
Okay,
things. So I'm
gotcha.
having it. Frustrating that I can't pre-read these things before I get here. And I wouldn't be able to share things back to put them through Andrew either, so it's gonna be ineffective at this point.
Sort of trying to work on something, I need a copy of what they're gonna put on the table as far as just creating that flow of, you know, how things are gonna go.
Yeah.
So,
Right, and that won't necessarily be a zoning bylaw that we're gonna work on that list. That's gonna also be more of a policy.
It just have to be in concert with what there's,
Right.
what they're gonna require.
There was the restrictions or exemptions that generally were the 500 feet within, and there was a list of almost 12 or 13 different types of locations, facilities. And I think when we had the meeting that Greg and I went to, we took what was considered the top 5, which are generally the state ones that are already in the state law,
School
and a
and
couple
education.
others, and said, okay, keep that in your zoning bylaw, and all the others would fall under the HCA policy, so that both boards together could identify, is that appropriate with that? And then we would still go through the public hearing process, so we'd still get the entire neighborhoods the ability to have input and make reasonable decisions.
And change those distances to locations as we see fit for each location, rather than have a blanket 500 feet everywhere or something.
So that's where most of what we talked about falling under the HCA side of it versus zoning would land, as well as pretty much all the clauses regarding licensing or number of licenses was gonna come out of theirs and fall into our general bylaw, pretty much as you wrote it, which isn't really any different than what they were writing. It's just, it's
Right, so they don't need
our
to be.
jurisdiction, so it's just kind of creating the fine line so that one bylaw is a general bylaw, one's a zoning, and that might even make it easier to get the zoning bylaw passed if some of those stipulations aren't written into both, or vice versa. So that's part of the discussion we had, that's all I'm trying to bring up.
There's a separation of zoning, which should be for locations where this is gonna be permissible types of locations in proximity to certain things, versus talking about the license and the number of facilities and things we saw as a licensing and a board control issue. So those are gonna fall under the HCA, or a license, which we're spelling out that you have to get a license from us beyond the state license. So once they're licensed by the state, their final steps come back with everything put together and get a license from us, which is revocable. That gives us a little more power if they do something non-compliant or fall out of compliance, and gives them timeframes that are spelled out to get back within compliance before penalties happen. But it was a very good distinction between what's a legal law versus a zoning issue. And it made the pile on the zoning board's plate, I think, a lot, the planning board's plate a lot lighter, which makes them get through it quicker, I hope. And then the host agreement, if we keep that as a policy, we'll just make sure we outline these things in our policy we want in it. And we have a very good idea, looking for what things we discussed already with the grow facility we're gonna have in town, and the things we wanna add to that. So we could go off that as a template maybe, and go from there. suggested point to make the modifications. But that policy, I think, is something we adopt. I don't think that's a meeting vote. So there's less pressure to have that set than there is to get these other things finished before town meeting. Still want to work on it, but I'm just saying I don't want to put too much into that till these other things are done.
Yeah. Yeah, at minimum, kind of create the outline of what the policy will contain so that we all agree going forward,
enough.
this is what we would do.
Right, because we want to show them that at our meeting.
Right.
Maybe not this one, but next one.
Do we have any further questions on the marijuana bylaw discussion? I'm open. All right.
Did you come up with a bylaw?
Yeah, I just presented it right here. You want a copy?
Yeah, that'd be
Sure.
great. Sorry.
This is intended mostly to be on the licensing side, what would fall under our board's jurisdiction, not what planning board's still working on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry to be late.
No, it's okay. I do appreciate you actually making it.
And
Makes a difference. It reminds me that people out there apparently still do care about this subject, and it's not gonna be a surprise on town floor when
if you
all of
look
a sudden
through
I'm inundated by the people that still care, but they just weren't talking to us.
If you look through it and have concerns or questions, please, I'd like to hear them before we leave tonight so that we can air those publicly. If you see any, please.
All right, so we'll move on to the next item. This is an item I had requested to be on. Capital plan, the 5-year plan moving forward, well, actually, I should have said 20 to 25, because that's what we're really discussing now, correct? Just want to kind of review again where you're at with the process, the participating members, and how that information is being brought before the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee as we start to lead into annual town meeting, what the expectations are and where you're looking at.
Yeah, last year I kind of took on the capital plan myself. I kind of took what was developed by the Collins Center, the active capital planning committee. There was some dates where we met, kind of discussed some things, and then we put a plan together before the special. But the input that we got before then, I kind of used to fit within what we could actually afford with our free cash. So there was some involvement from the capital planning committee last year, but not a ton. It was a lot of kind of looked at and made some personal recommendations. It's up to you guys to see how you want to proceed to this year. I'm open to suggestions.
Do you have any current members or members that may be interested in still participating?
I haven't had an opportunity to really touch base with everybody who is listed as an appointed member, so I can give you a better answer at the next meeting. But I provided you guys a list of who's currently on there. I know Charlie, you're listed as a member.
He
one
is?
member of the finance committee, and then 2 members of the community, 2 or 3 members of the community.
There's a
Did
sheet,
they,
yeah.
were they supposed to serve a year? Or was it?
I think it was a 3-year staggered, or a staggered term.
Who are they?
On the list,
Chris Higgins is, yeah.
Chris, Paul Cranston, Charlie Chase, Brian Inman, and Catherine Flick were members. Brian Inman and Catherine Flick were the last 2 appointed. They're through 2021, and the other 3 members are through 2020. So right now, we technically have them all sitting there
Waiting.
waiting, or not waiting and not letting us know that they're no longer interested in being participants. Do we actually have a capital planning committee charge?
We'll have to look one up.
All right.
Sure.
if not, I think we need to revisit that as a board and create one. And this may be something also that I do know different dynamics, but when you're in a bigger city, a lot of times these particular capital committees are a combination of high-level administration, whether it's CFOs, city managers, potentially subcommittees on city councils, things like that. Most of them get lost in just paying attention to the numbers and may not actually have the true experience of facility maintenance, facility upgrades, and balancing the cost of maintaining versus when is it time to give up and just buy a new, through multiple infrastructure. So it's not just buildings, it's vehicles, it's sewer, it's water, it's streets. I mean,
Baseball stadiums.
apparently, yes, that'll be a fun one. So with all that said, sometimes you need to develop a committee that's actually of those people that's what they do. Whether it's department heads, that's what they do, and they're speaking strictly from the operational benefit, not so much as the financial benefit. But they need to understand the financials to know when it's time to flip the coin and go from maintenance to replacement. But then we need the next level that takes that plan that's created and truly reviews the budget. So I'm just bringing it up so that we can see the different tiers of this is what I need, here's the numbers I expect it to cost, this is why I think it is. And then someone's got to be above them and say, right, but this is all we can afford this year. And figure out if we can push it to the next year. And it's a combination.
It's kind of like a modified way of how we handled the 19 one in the final stages, where I really reached out to each one of the department heads and said, what do you need? You know, if it's more than $10,000, what is it that you're looking to get? And then, you know, once I got that list, basically said, all right, here's the top tier things that we need and can afford, and then everything else we'll just kind of we'll stagger in to see how we can address it over the next 5 years. So, I mean, it's a general principle, but we can try to get it to the committee phase.
One other thing I'd like to talk about on this is how we present capital items at annual town meeting in the budget. If I'm correct, right now it's individual articles that each state so much dollar for this, so much dollar for that, and we usually give the general stipulation of fund whatever means necessary. Don't get me wrong, but we don't say it's just this or just this. Sometimes it's either raise and appropriate or it's capital debt, various. But the point is, when we present those separately like that, the town's not looking at a complete capital budget. They're looking at individual pieces that just fit into different departmental needs, and the town's not seeing it as a capital budget. They're just seeing it as special requests. That's how I understand a lot of people are seeing it, because they don't do this for a living. So they just see a number, okay, we need a fire truck, but they don't, there's a lot of people in town, Claire, not people that work on the finance committee. So I'm saying there are other people that don't see it that way.
You could always put a heading there.
But that's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Articles are capital items, and then list those.
Exactly, but just like our omnibus budget, outside of the enterprise, it's one big budget, we go through each line item, but it's one article. And those line items can be adjusted if the town says we need to adjust it or canceled out, and it doesn't change anything to everything else in it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm suggesting one article that says capital budget. And that would show a total of all capital investments for that year expected, not the town having to say, okay, there was that for 60,000, that for 500,000, that for 23. How much are we putting into capital this year's budget? And we need to identify how much in that we're saying we're going to use under this year's budget based on the bond cost, not necessarily the total cost presented for the specific piece of equipment. And that's not really presented to the town the way we've been presenting it. So that's what I'm suggesting. Maybe we need to think about it. I'm not saying this is how you have to do it. But it came to me that if I'm sitting in the town meeting and I see all these, I can't really figure out how that translates into the year-to-year cost that's coming from capital investments.
The thing you've got to key, it's my understanding, is that a capital item goes on as an article, a separate article. So only that money can be spent for that item. You can't roll them in together.
My understanding is every
Because
line
then
item
you
in
could-
there is the same way. So it's just like, if you give a police department budget that shows salaries, overtime, tuition, you cannot use tuition to pay for overtime because every line item was approved individually by the town.
I think you're missing my point.
Well, it's all under one article is what I'm saying, so it's the same thing. Each line item under an article that says capital can only be spent on that line item.
They'll be spending out of that one lump sum.
Only if they're breaking the law. That's what I'm saying. They're not legally allowed to spend outside of that.
You need
From a
to-
different
you could give
capital
a
item.
total of what's gonna be spent, you know, read the article with the separate, and then give the total of all those items. But you've got to put each item in a separate article. So only that amount of money is gonna be spent for that item. And if there's any money left in that item, it stays there in that article. It can't be spent for anything else unless the town votes.
That's correct.
Yeah, and that's
That
why.
still applies if it's all under one article with different line items.
No, I
They
would
cannot-
disagree completely.
Well, that's, okay.
What do you think, Charlie?
Well, I think, maybe I've misunderstood you, but I think what you're saying is, take for example this fire engine that we're purchasing.
Yeah.
This, I think the figure's 500,000.
Yeah,
That's a separate article.
yeah.
That's what she's saying.
Right, what I'm saying though is,
Yeah, I know what you're.
no. The omnibus budget, that's one article. Are you saying that what they approved for the police department can then be spent on the fire department?
No.
Then
No,
why
because
not?
it
It's
says
all under one
police.
article. It's because there's separate line items that are individually approved.
There's
Just like a
separate
capital
fire
plan under one
department.
article would be the same. You're not legally allowed to move money from one line item to another.
I believe what
Without-
Claire's trying to say is because the capital purchase items by law, they have to be their own article, period. Because it's a capital purchase. And that maybe, I don't know if it is enough.
Well, let's review
But
that.
if
That's
a
why I
cap- if a
wanted the
capital
discussion so
purchase-
that we could have time to
And-
think it through. I mean, we're still months away before we have to worry
I
about
worry
it.
about convoluting the warrant as we go in the budget at meeting and making this possibly more confusing to some people. But we could certainly generate a capital purchase sheet, which we hand out with the papers at the door. So people, if you'd like to refer, we've enclosed a sheet entitled Capital Purchases, which shows you what we intend to spend this year, where the funding's coming from, and gives you an idea how it fits in our annual budget. For those of you that are interested.
Very similar.
It will, and then we don't have to put it as part of the warrant, but we can still give them that information without changing the way that we do things that people are very accustomed to, because this meeting gets drawn out pretty long as is sometimes. Food for thought. We don't have to make any decisions now, but.
I know
It-
other
it-
towns that have put stuff in one item, and then they're spending it on other things.
We don't want to do that, but I think, I'm hoping that if Matt sees it, maybe if we do it that way, if we generate that.
Still,
that
that's
paper and
kind
hand
of
it
what I
out,
was speaking of.
then we don't have to list it and vote on it that way, but we can give them the piece of paper right up front on their packet that says, the following is our, capital expenditures for this year. Page 2 is a capital plan for 5 years. Page 1, this is the capital purchase we intend to make this year, their funding sources and how they impact our budget.
Attach a separate sheet.
So-
And then it defines it for everybody, and they can see what's coming out of their tax levy, what might be a bond, or what's an override, underwrite if we ask for it, and where it's coming from and why we're funding it that way. And then they can see how they flow year to year by flipping to the second page and seeing the 5-year. They can see when something falls off and we pick the next payment up, and they can understand how that payment flows just by putting it on the next page.
Okay.
Without putting it on the warrant, we can still give them that information. It's almost like defining something you're voting on. Vote for yes does this, and vote for no does this. It's sort of like just giving them that information. without trying to confuse the warrant, because I think,
I get you, and then people
Process
are
works.
used to the way the warrant's been, so that, I agree.
no,
So that's something that I
it's
think
a good
just
idea. I
thinking
like the
it
idea, I
through.
just don't want to put it in the warrant, that's all.
And then also, when we speak to the capital, these are the total cost of each item. We also want to see how that total cost would then look as if it was the effect on the bonds being paid versus the actual full payment. We're not spending 500-some thousand necessarily that year.
So when we look at our
So-
5-year plan, we can figure out how we want to put that out to the town. I mean, I don't want to include the whole wish list, but include what we're doing for this year off it, and maybe the wish list for next year, but show something that's on payments, and we can drag it out, this payment, and drop down below it and say, so much per year for so many years. And we can show when something cuts off, and when the next thing will pick up land under that, and I think it'd be easy for people to understand that flow. You know, if we had a fire engine and we had 10 years at this payment, then at year 10 it closes off, you'd say anticipate in 10 years from now, in 2030, that we're gonna pick up at something else into that bond.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then they'd understand how it flows and why we do it that way.
Yes, sir.
I've seen all this stuff here, and this, excuse me, this capital plan is spending, this is what you're speaking about.
Yes.
Right, capital purchases, things we need to buy,
Now,
and how we fund them.
my question is, why can't we also have a plan showing the town how we're going to earn the money that we are going to be spending?
That's what we're talking about, doing that annually, every
That's
year.
Old business under the investment policies. It is something we're trying to look at more clearly.
'Cause that
So
would
it's
be
something
very-
that we're
it would be-
thinking about.
It would be helpful, because I don't think people
But we give
realize-
people this, and then we give them what you're talking about there. Here's where those sources of funding,
Not having
that's what
the-
Matt's talking about.
He's speaking also that when you look at how much we're gonna spend, you're
Right,
not
where's it
telling them
coming
how
from?
much we're gonna earn that year, so it's hard for them to determine if the spending is an appropriate amount. Am I correct? So you don't have a revenue to spending presentation at town meeting to say,
You
This
put
is
it-
ex-
you put it nicely, right.
so it might be something I know we do that during, well, finance committee does that during the budget development process, but it's not necessarily presented the same way at town meeting.
Right, we have to project the revenues, where they're coming from, be it from school, from state aid, from, chapter 90 funds, or from the tax levy. We project where all these sources are coming from, what our number is, from water and sewer and everything else. And and then we have to balance that against what we spend, and we certainly do that. And then when you get to this, we also look at what we're gonna borrow beyond that. And that's why I'm saying, I think we do one page that explains where our capital purchase is coming from. What portion comes from the tax levy, what portion comes from a loan, which is paid through the tax levy, but over a period. And what portion may be grant money that it's coming in that we have to spend on a certain item.
What portion might be revenue
And what, yeah, exactly. But,
at some level.
so if we send this out, this 5-year plan out, and we send one page that says this year's capital purchases are as follows, we can have a column that says how they're funded, what's out of the levy, what's out of a bond, what's rolling over a bond, a new one, or whatever we're doing, what has come from a grant or anticipated grant money. You can even do it with the school budget, how much comes from the state, anticipated transportation receipts and for the number of students and things, and give an idea of what money we get from there, what comes from the taxes, what goes to the other school. We could break a lot of things down like that. But I think for the capitals alone is a good idea. I wouldn't want to split too many budget items up like that and explain too much of the funding. We do enough of that here, and it takes many, many, many meetings. But I think we could do it for the capitals and tell them where it's coming from so they understand the funding source.
Right, no, I don't know about the fire truck. Is fire truck something that we're thinking about, or?
It's been requested to be on the special town meeting because we have Engine 4, which is our main fire truck that is dying on us.
Because
It's been dying
I
for a
don't know-
while, it's just,
I don't know how much it is, but that sure would need to be thought about, 'cause that's probably quite a bit of money.
Yes.
Yes.
It's been thought about quite heavily this spring. It failed inspection for a rotted frame. So they had to weld metal plates in the frame to get it to pass inspection. Most recently, the emergency brake system failed. They had to have that fixed. It's part of a batch of Pierce trucks. A lot of Pierce trucks were recalled. This one wasn't. For a lot of rust and rot in the vehicles. It's it's surprising to me it's still going, it's still in service. It needs to be replaced. It's the truck that goes out most often. And we've certainly got a lot of use out of it over the years. But it's ready to go before it kapumps.
However, selling that requirement to the citizens may be a difficult challenge.
I don't think so. People that have seen that engine in public know what it looks like. It looks pretty sad. It's
Well,
embarrassing that it's our frontline truck to me.
the fire chief has also shown himself to be prepared. So I'm sure when it comes to special town meeting, he'll be there to answer all the questions that may come up. I'm not saying he'll win the argument, but he's definitely gonna have the information necessary to explain why he's asking for it.
And he's being reasonable, looking for the lower end trucks, not some of the nicer trucks. They start at $600,000 or $700,000, but that's not, not in our ballpark. We're not looking there. And
All
he
right.
has put a committee together as well to look into it.
So, I believe that's enough for right now on the capital plan. I was just trying to bring some things up so we can continue to work on it. Make sure that we understand the committee, what the roles are. So, just to summarize, I'm looking to just find a charge if one exists. If not, let us know so we can properly draft one. Assuming we decide to continue with the concept.
And you can include that capital plan expenditure sheet as part of their charge for town meeting, to have a pamphlet to hand out to people that explain it. It could be part of their
Yeah.
charge to put that together.
It's either that or it'll still work with Andrew and the finance committee, because they may just be making recommendations to the finance committee, and then the finance committee presents usually the booklet and the information that gets presented. So I don't want to necessarily say it's theirs if, I want the finance committee to have a word in that. That's all I meant. And who's presenting what, so it's not too complicated and confusing once we get to town floor and who wrote what.
Well, I think the plan's important, but I don't think the plan is they're not the ones deciding what we're spending.
That's why I said the finance
Right.
committee may be appropriate in presenting this based on what the capital. Either way, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
When that time comes, we'll discuss when we draft or revise any of the charge that may exist
And
to
we'll see what we can
clarify
get for the
that.
charge if they want to stay involved and what we have.
Next item, use of Energy Conservation Advisory Committee. I brought this up just to bring it back, because I recall going back 2014, 2015, I remember being at an annual town meeting and standing with somebody that was a previous member of the Energy Advisory Committee, and his frustration beyond belief about what was based on what they provided, or that just frustration because information was presented and it felt like it was completely ignored. And then I know for a little while, we literally just lost everybody that was on the committee, and then we recently got someone that was on it, but I don't know how much we're using them, if at all we're using them. And so I wanted to bring it up because if you have a committee and you don't use the members, why have the committee? It's intended so that you can delegate some of the work that you can't do yourself, or is eating up time where you need to spend your time elsewhere. I believe a lot of the Energy Conservation Advisory Committee members could be doing is either site investigations to identify things, doing audits of buildings to identify how many lights, create an actual equipment schedule, so that if there's so many lights in the building, so many lights at Ruggles Lane, you can take that and get a quick audit, expedite a review to get a proposal to figure out replacing them all with LEDs. You can have them work on grants, develop the information necessary to move forward with a grant, do all that legwork to present it before the town administrator, so he's not doing all that legwork just to get to that step. And then he can review it, bring it to the Board of Selectmen when he believes there's a right approach to it, take certain directions as appropriate. All of these committees and commissions that either have someone that nobody's talked to for 4 years and you don't even know if they're still a member, means you haven't called them in the last 6 months. So it means we're not using them. So the reason I brought this one specifically up is I know we have a member on the board, and I know the individual wants to be a part of something, but nobody's talked to the person. They don't know what they're asked to do, what they can do, and they have thoughts on what they can do. And I don't want people to start disappearing again because nobody picks up the phone or the email and says, hey, where are you at? Let's have a meeting. This is why most of these committees require a minimum of quarterly meetings, just to make sure people are involved and participating, and they feel that the effort is warranted and appreciated. So I'm really trying to push this, not just on this one, but this one I know was brought to my attention, so I'm just trying to pass it on. Let's see what we can do to incorporate people. I wanted to get a little feedback from you as well as the other Board of Selectmen members to see what the thoughts are on this.
Come and contact me. I wasn't aware that they were active at all within the last 3 years, so coming on board, I just assumed that everything was handled as far as energy conservation wise directly through the town administrator to CMRPC, who had been coordinating our grant funding through green communities based off recommendations of ECI, who's one of the priority audit.
Expediters.
Yeah, expediters for the Green Communities program. So that's just the approach that I've taken since I got here, but wasn't aware that there was a approach before that.
Actually, I believe that has been the approach, and that's why this has pretty much been a defunct, unused committee, because people get on it and nobody asks them to do anything. I think prior, any ask of them was, could you write our Green Communities report? Well, if you have someone that's good at it, it's a good thing to ask. It takes a little time. It's not too difficult if given the resources and access as necessary. But there's a lot involved with green communities and energy advisory that you can think of anything, and all it says is, ask them, could they please follow up? Give me an answer in 3 months. And now you're just waiting for them to get it while you're working something else. And so that's where, on some of these committees, I think it's really important, even the capital planning committee, they won't do anything until you say, please come to the table, let's do this, and we set up I need this, this, and this done. When can you get to it? So, and that is our office, Board of Selectmen, any of these committees that fall under our jurisdiction, it's our job to make sure we're using them. And so I'm bringing it up because that's how you get people to participate, is because you ask them to do something and then you follow up and then you continue to use them and they feel there's a purpose, there's a reason they're on it. So these boards aren't anything, at a minimum, whether it's every 3 months or every 6 months, I'm suggesting we need to reach out to every member on every board and confirm. If we look at when the last time one of these boards met, and it was in 2013, when was the last time we asked them if they still want to be on the board? We need to do that. We need to chase it down. We need to clean it up, not just see a list of names and say, well, they haven't brought anything to my attention. Would you say the same thing if it was the police chief never talked to you for 3 years? No, you pick up the phone and say, what's the police chief doing? What's going on? Are we on top of things here? So I'm just thinking we've got to start looking at it, and I'm not isolating anyone here. I think it's been a habit for a little while in this town where you kind of just lose sight and you kind of just think, okay, go do your thing, and then you forget about it and you hope they come back. I'm suggesting we need to look at it through a different management style than maybe we have previously been doing it, and try to really pull them in and say, you're on the board because we need you, and here's why we need you. Can you do this in such and such a time? Which means you now have a follow-up. Within so much amount of time, if you haven't gotten it, we reach out to them and say, what was preventing you? Do you not have access to resources? Are you actually able to do this? Did we ask too much? And then we can pull it back to make sure they're still asking within what they can offer, because we don't want to scare people off, but we need to know what they can offer and then ask of it. So that's just where I'm coming from. I know it sounds a little soapboxy here, but I just had to get it out. So if you could think about that, Andrew, definitely don't hesitate. I like to keep this on the business agenda, not necessarily this committee, but just generally committees in general. Come up with some thoughts, how we can actually make this something where people actually see it, whether you can work it, whether it's something that you think when it comes to just staying in touch. Is it something that Sandy's good enough to just stay in touch with the members on a quarterly basis, just to make sure the communication's out there? Please get back to me in 2 weeks if you still want to be on this, if you still have thoughts. We need to just, everybody has a role. All these boards have a role, but we still need to come back to a centralized concept where we can pass the information from one board to the next and make sure we're all sharing the information that each group's doing. And that's why this came to mind. So I'd just like to kind of keep looking at the hub of the wheel right now. And generally in this town, that's town administrator and board of selectmen type. We're not the ultimate authority of having jurisdiction. I mean, there are planning boards, there are other boards that have complete jurisdiction we can't touch. But generally, we should be that hub of the wheel where we make sure they're all working together and we're going in the right direction. I have nothing further on that. Anybody have questions on that? Yes, Sam?
You know, I came to this meeting for a purpose, and I think this Energy Advisory Committee concept is focusing on it, and it seems as though we have few people who are assisting in growing this town. And everybody has their own responsibilities, and everybody has their own positions, and we need more people. So when a town is searching out outside the town, looking for assistance, they have something called an RFP. Why can't the town come up with a plan and enlist private companies to come in and assist us in developing the town? No doubt they would benefit from it. For instance, if we had open land and we knew a shopping, and we were shopping center folks, which we aren't, we would enlist the outside people to come in and share with us your concept of shopping centers. However, we're not that kind of a town. We have other issues and concerns. And maybe what we need to do is ask for some help for outside, and let's see what they can do for us, knowing very well that they're going to do something for themselves. But maybe we can join these together. Now, I'm thinking about the fact, specifically, solar is very popular and it's big, and we're developing a solar bylaw, which is important. And the planning board's doing a great job developing that. However, I really think that if we would reach out somehow and enlist the assistance of others to develop a solar bylaw, knowing very well that they're going to be making income from the shopping center, but maybe it'll help us as well. Because if we rely on committees, we're going to be relying on committees for the next 20 years, and we won't get anything done because you just said that the committees aren't really very effective because you need to bring them forward. So I guess basically what I'm getting at is just a thought to enlist the assistance of others who will also benefit from their services in helping growing this town and helping our town be more revenue receiving. We seem to be talking about a capital plan, $500,000 for a fire truck. I'm not saying it's not needed. I don't know anything about fire trucks other than they're red and they put out fires. But we lost $500,000 from the dump being closed, and we've been lamenting about that for years. Our tax rate went up $2 a thousand. Now, it really doesn't take a brain, and I'm not pointing a finger at anyone here, or generally, but it doesn't really take a brain to lower the tax rate, yet increase the assessments, or vice versa. I think we need some outside assistance for revenue producing issues related to this town, because all I see is spend, 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 and a capital plan that makes me frightened hearing what we need to spend, and knowing very well that, I shouldn't say knowing very well, I'm thinking, and only from what I've been hearing, that the sewer system is going to need some help someday, maybe sooner rather than later. I don't know what we're doing to plan for that. And those are big expenses. I know that Doug Martin and Doug used to design sewer systems, and he and I have spoken about costs of materials and equipment for sewer systems, and that could be quite an expense. So I think we need to concern ourselves with assistance for revenue-producing entities within this town. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If I may, my name is Clark Fenner, and I'm going to follow what Mr. Lipscomb has just suggested, because I think it's a good segue. I think I've seen a number of you, my company is doing the solar garden, and my partner Andrew Keller and I are here tonight. We've spent a lot of time with the planning board over the last 10 months or so, since the announcement of a new solar incentive program in the state of Massachusetts was made. And we realized that possibly there were opportunities that were going to come back into play here in Barre. I have a number of landowners in Barre that have approached me about developing solar projects on their land, and hence spending the time with the planning board to construct a bylaw that met the needs of the residents of Barre, preventing them from going where they shouldn't be going, and citing them in areas where they're not going to impose on the town, its culture, etc. Along those lines, it became very apparent that the town itself was not taking advantage of the revenue opportunities that solar presented to the town, both in the form of tax pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, as well as the opportunities for siting solar projects on municipal property. Now, Andrew and I have done both private and public municipal solar projects on not only standard greenfield, but also rooftops and capped landfills. And the fact that Mr. Lipson brought up the 2 landfills here, with all of the land that is available in Barre in terms of farmland, the land that's being ignored is land which is currently costing you money to maintain and generating no potential revenue for you. And just to give you a sense of what the opportunity could be, the Town Farm Road landfill, which has been closed, I guess, for a very long time, it appears that there's roughly about 30 acres of usable land on the top of that landfill. That represents, based on Massachusetts law, you could do a 5 megawatt project there. And in this particular utility zone of N-Grid, under the current program, if you get going on it, you could potentially generate just in lease income, if you didn't want to invest any of your own capital, just by bringing a third-party ownership into it, you could generate roughly $100,000 a year in lease income, and then roughly, because you're not going to tax yourself, the solar company is generally prepared to pay about $10,000 a megawatt in terms of a tax pilot. So you're looking at roughly about $150,000 a year in revenue that's sitting there waiting for you to just take without imposing any burden on services or anything like that. That's effectively free money. The old Colebrook landfill, I think there's probably about 16 acres there. You might be able to get 3 megawatts on that. So now you're looking at, depending on ownership of that, I'm not sure if does the town own that, or does Triple O still own that?
I don't know.
Which one?
Not sure.
Where is that?
Old Cobra.
Because I know, I live on
Same.
Town Road. So I
I'm
know
talking
the-
about Old Colebrook Road.
Yeah, where's the old Colebrook Road?
Is that next to the transfer station? Is that the
That would actually,
No, that's
he's
not-
speaking of, it's off Berry Depot Road. The actual landfill that we
That's
use
not
to get all
ours.
our income. That's
it's not
privately
ours.
owned.
Okay.
Does Barry own that, or?
No, it's owned by a
Waste
private
management.
company. We just had certain regulations involved on it, but we don't own it.
I was
Old
wrong.
Colebrook Road.
That's why we actually had to go to town vote to acquire just a transfer station property, because it was owned by the same owner. We didn't own that
Right, so
prior.
even if it's privately owned, there's tax revenue, pilot revenue
Mhm.
that would be an opportunity there. And there, I'm sure there's a lot of land around it that may be opportunities for you, and you could make suggestions about that.
I believe they have a cogen or something off of the methane that's also currently installed
And
there.
that's fine. That's
As a
fine.
private, so I don't know the details, but I do
They
believe they
coexist very well.
burn the methane to create
But
electricity.
the main point that I wanted to bring up now is that with the new program getting started, there's going to be a great flurry of solar activity in the state of Massachusetts, particularly in the National Grid territory. That program is going to fill up reasonably quickly. The other limitation that you have, or the other hurdle, I won't say limitation, the other hurdle that you have here in Barry is the fact that the Barry substation is full. The only way that any new solar, other than what's already been approved, and there are some that have been approved but not built yet, in the area that are on that circuit, it's going to require a new or an upgraded substation. National Grid is saying that that's going to be roughly a $5 million upgrade, because all new transformers, et cetera, that need to be brought into that. And that requires roughly 25 megawatts of capacity in order for it to be economically feasible. Each 5 megawatt site takes, which is the maximum you can on any given parcel of land in the state, requires about 25 to 30 acres. So you're looking at those kinds of sites located along that corridor. And I'm working with the Caucasus on sites way up in the hills that nobody's ever gonna see, that we can get an awful lot of that capacity. We have another developer I'm working with in, it's got a project in Hubbardston on the same line, about another 3 megawatts. And I know there are several other landowners in town, but I wanted just to state that from the perspective of municipal land, if the town is looking to raise revenue, we'd be more than happy to work with the town to identify the opportunities, run some financial models for you to see what kind of revenue could be generated for you. And then from that standpoint, if it makes sense, include you in all of the opportunities that we're looking at with National Grid, assuming, of course, that the new bylaw gets passed. That's the first hurdle that we all have to get over. But I just wanted to introduce ourselves and make that proposal to the Board of Selectmen, because I do understand that if you're looking at a $500,000 fire truck, that revenue from any source is a valuable thing.
Did you have something to add?
Yeah, the one concern I have about the farm road part being, might be something more for an RFP if it's something that the town does, if the board does really want to look into, would be whether or not that's an uncapped landfill, and whether or not that's being regulated by.
That wasn't ever capped.
It was never capped.
No.
So how much of that uncapped area is actually, open to being able to be reused as a solar area?
And that'll be a DEP issue.
Right.
We'll have to talk to DEP, which we've been involved with before, in determining what is the capping mechanism. Is it just strictly a dirt cap? Is there any membrane there? Generally, what ends up happening is that these have systems which are set just on top. They do not penetrate. And for that reason, we need to understand the engineering that was done, if any.
And whether or not, if it's uncapped, if the DEP is going to require the town to cap it.
Exactly.
Before anything happens. So I think from the town farm road perspective, it's not just as straightforward. It's something that we're going to have to take into consideration. We do go that route, but then also I believe that we would require a town meeting folks to enter into the lease of town property.
Sure. Yeah, we expect that's the case.
Yes, Sam.
Excuse me, didn't you have some involvement in one of the other towns you were working with?
Yes.
Where you built something on a land?
Well, we did that same type project where we put a solar farm on a capped landfill. Basically, now it takes in about $90,000 a year in revenue on a lease.
So can Barry join into that $90,000?
Well, we can look at a similar type program, but we'll see what our options are at the discretion of the board.
Because from what this gentleman said, that they have to fill, we can't get online. Isn't it better?
We have to get the moratorium.
Isn't it better to
first.
get
Minor problem.
in place and do it, think about doing it more quickly?
Well, it costs $500,000 or $500,000 for us to cap, or $1 million for us to cap a landfill, and we're only gonna take in $90,000 a year, and it's gonna take 15 years to make our money back, then
Well,
that's
but we don't know whether it needs to be capped or not. So we have to we have to deal with that.
I'm sure it would have to be capped in order for it to go forward, but whether, what type of cap is gonna be the question.
Oh, yeah,
It's gonna have to be capped. I know what went in there.
I thought it was.
I know what other people.
Uneducated
call it.
response.
I walked up there once and it looked like pretty much open field land, so I wasn't
The
around town.
landfill is up, isn't the fields at the top of the hill? The landfill is down behind,
Oh, I guess I
where the
didn't
cell
walk.
tower is. It's down past the cell tower.
I mean, there might be open space on the same parcel that'd be usable, that you could work
Yeah,
with.
but because- That's right, there was a cell tower there, I remember seeing it. I don't know what rules they had to comply with.
I don't know all the details, but look into it. You guys are amenable to it.
Well, I think we should at least keep it on as a potential old bids business to also determine whether we want to do RFP, RFQ, whether we want to go chapter 39M through lease concept, whether we want to do chapter 25 through energy. We got to look at how we'd bid it, how we get proposals, whether we want to do a sealed proposal, with qualifications with sealed proposals, things like that. And then determine who would be on the board that would make the decision on who won. So, I mean, there'd be a combination of things that we'd have to discuss, so, I do agree, though, that at a minimum, we're expecting, if we did something with Town Farm Road, there would be some level of DEP requirement that would create additional costs. So we'd have to figure out how we would even write an RFQ, or similar to say, at what point do we stop, and this is the most we're gonna pay you once we get that answer, and if we wanna move forward, then, but we're not gonna award it to you and then have you come back and say we owe you 50% of it because we had to bail on the fact we couldn't fund the DEP stuff. So we just have to think this through and how we present it.
Just a suggestion, so I've taken the lead on a lot of our regional projects, and we've done quite a few over the last few years, and we've been brought into a community together, a project that Park and I are working on together actually currently, where they were trying to solve for a capital improvement. It happened to be with one of their, I think their brownfield, like it was an old burn site of some sort, but they needed to create some revenue so they could then go to the equivalent DEP and get that capped properly and take care of it properly. So we knew the amount of money that we were trying to solve for, and they were looking at it from the perspective of municipal bond, of, you know, if this lease and pilot were to, create $100,000 worth of revenue, that equated to a bond of this size that didn't have an impact on the taxpayers, and therefore they could go down the path of fixing this one facility that needed improvement. So we've been able to be creative, and that's another creative way that you can look at it from an RFQ or RFP perspective, is look for different organizations to come to you with something that's outside of the normal box, because most people that will respond to an RFP or RFQ are just looking at like the simple black and white economics, versus you can look for creativity around saying, okay, we know roughly that the landfill cap might cost us $1 million, and the town doesn't have $1 million to spend on that. We'd rather not open up that can of worms, but this could. So if we're working backwards towards, okay, a bond to solve for that could cost X, therefore the RFQ or RFP parameters are that we need to see at least $50,000, $100,000 worth of revenue from this, any RFP or RFQ response, gives you the ability to cover those costs that you anticipate. And that's the way you could build it into your RFP or RFQ, so that way you're not getting down the road, spending a lot of time and effort on it, and then finding out that you wasted time because a developer comes in and says, wait a minute, we didn't plan on $1 million upgrade, and the town says, well, we can't afford $1 million upgrade, so we just wasted 6 months or a year of time. So I just share that as a real life example we're doing with another town, because we figured out the problem that they were trying to solve for, and we used the solar. We've even done this on an economic development level with an industrial park, with a community that wanted to create a new industrial park for their community. They went out for an EDA grant with the federal government, and they needed matching funds. Our solar project, the lease revenue from the solar project and the tax revenue from the pilot was the monies needed to help match those funds. So I just bring that as a couple examples of ways to creatively think about how you could create revenue, solve a capital expense issue, and also create some long-term revenue for the town.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So, there you go. We've discussed energy, we've discussed capital, marijuana, treasurer collector, and several things. Commission on Disabilities as well.
Do you want comments on this?
If you have some, then sure.
Sorry, I only have 3, I promise.
No, it's perfect. I know we had actually asked you to if you had the time, so thank you.
Yeah. In section E, where you're talking about, smoking and consumption in section 17, so, almost like section C. You talk about smoking and consumption of marijuana in the interior, exterior of the premises is not permitted. And then you talk a great deal about smoking, but right now, a lot of what marijuana is being used as is not smoking, it's as edibles. So you might want to include more detail of what you're looking for there, of that, so that there's a little bit more information. I'm not sure what I'm.
It might be better to reverse it and actually be less specific and just say consumption of marijuana products. Now you're not defining the type of consumption or the type of marijuana product.
I think,
And then if it's done outside in that spot and it's identified and can be followed up legally.
I think the public issue with the smoking is not that somebody's actually taking nicotine in a cigarette, it's that the smoke is offensive to others around them. And I think the same thing applies to the marijuana. If it's legal for people to have it and use it, it's the smoke that's offensive and bothersome to people around them. So if somebody had a marijuana brownie that they were consuming, I don't see how that is gonna, make a public issue for somebody around them. That's where we get into the debate of if they're their children or something else, but
Well, that kind of goes back to that there's not going to be public, or consumption on site, so.
right, it shouldn't be.
There shouldn't be consumption in any form, whether or not it's smoking.
Right, in town buildings, wherever, there shouldn't be any use of consumption of it and anywhere. So I guess, yeah, if we did want to say, well, especially keeping it away from kids, then. I think this was what I'm saying, this was written originally, I think this is taken off, the bylaw we have covers smoking and smoking of marijuana more specifically, because it's a public smoking and being bothersome to other people, so either another section that covers consumption separately, or just redefine it to say consumption of any type, edibles, or further define it.
I would be more general, again, back to consumption of any type of marijuana product. There's two reasons for that. One is I do believe it reduces the potential of congregation in front of any type of site. The idea is you're not going to come out, have a brownie, and then if you give someone else a bite of a brownie, nobody technically knows what you're sharing, but you could technically be giving it to someone you shouldn't. And the intent was not doing it in public, no consumption of marijuana in public, because the idea there was depending on how much someone takes, depends on the effect it may have on them, and then how they react in public. So it depends on the level. This is not very subjective. I mean, it's the truth. Depending on how much you take in and your body type, you are going to be affected by it. How you're affected doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become crazy, make bad decisions. It just may mean you can become the nuisance people don't want.
It does say smoking.
And I'll just leave it at that. You could become the nuisance people don't want if you consume too much THC. And if a group does it in a parking lot of a site, this is specific about not eating in the building or on the premises. Because the idea was, if I'm understanding those that were asking about this, and it kind of was rolled into the bylaw of the zoning, they don't want it necessarily in certain neighborhoods as much because they don't want people congregating there and hanging out there and creating the potential for easily passed on to those that aren't legally allowed to have it. So the idea is go in, buy your stuff, and leave, not hang out. And so that's where I kind of agree with the be more generic. No going out and then start opening up a brand new package or whatever it is you bought and start eating it. It could just be a regular bag of chips, but nobody's going to know that. And the intent here right now is reduce it. Just like if somebody came out of a packy with a bottle in a brown bag, they pull the lid off, you don't know what's in the brown bag. But people don't do that. Why? Because we did not deem it acceptable. Otherwise, the police have every right to come up and say, please let me see that, what's in it. Oh, it's just bottled seltzer water. Well, they walk away, that's fine, but you're not going to be able to say it's just a regular brownie. Because now they're gonna take it and they're gonna test it. Because that's the only way they can prove it, but alcohol's a little easier to prove. They don't have to necessarily take the product and test it. So I do see the balance there. You need to leave the language broad enough so that in the event there is a true reason, we actually give the power to those that need to enforce these laws, something to enforce. I'm not a big fan of beating up on people about personal choices, but just do it somewhere else. Go home. That was generally right now the accepted concept of marijuana in Massachusetts is do it at home. Some people are trying to open up social consumption, but it's still not something widely accepted other than, again, big, large cities where they can hide within themselves and have a social consumption site.
Where it says smoking and consumption of marijuana, just simply add marijuana or marijuana byproducts.
Yeah. Something like that, just to
Simple
make
addition.
sure it's
Everything else
comprehensive.
is very restrictive and is covered, so just include byproducts to that.
So that was one.
So two is, you talked about signage, and I didn't see anything regarding.
That's part of the zoning bylaws, the
Okay.
signage.
I just wanted to be sure.
That's
because you
covering
specifically
locations,
mentioned
buildings,
signage.
and how it can be posted and things. That will be in, but it's, that's what I'm saying, total is covered.
State law does say, though, you cannot make restrictions on marijuana establishment signage that's more stringent than signage you have in place for package stores.
It also
So if
says
you don't
can-
have laws that tell you that you can't advertise alcohol is sold here, then you can't have laws that say you can't advertise marijuana is sold here. Unless the state has their own little rules about that, I think.
They
But
do.
we can't make that different than what we tell a package store, so that's all I'm bringing up.
But the state's been pretty restrictive on that anyways, that you can't glorify it, you can't promote it, sell it to kids. It's gonna be very generic. I don't think you can show a pot leaf or anything like that in the store. And you may not be allowed to say marijuana on the door. The state was very restrictive on what you can say on the sign.
Okay, so my third one was, why does it have to be a sergeant or higher in order to, for the police department in section D1?
That's, my understanding is there's always supposed to be a sergeant on shift for normal working days, if I'm correct, it says?
It does not say that,
I thought it says Monday through Friday.
that's for a specified visit, for an unannounced, it's
Weekdays, don't know.
What-
unscheduled, periodic inspection.
What section was that again?
D1. So if you were at 17, it's on that.
It does continue to say on weekdays in the next page, and that section continues on weekdays during normal business hours
Okay, I thought that was
to determine their
for
compliance.
regular visits, not for unannounced.
It would just
No.
be, you gotta go during their business hours, but you don't have to announce you're coming to inspect them. So if they're open Monday to Friday, 9 to noon, and that's it, you can show up anytime between 9 and noon on a business day, unannounced if you're a sergeant and
So my
inspect.
question is, why wouldn't that regulating how it's done, why wouldn't that be left up to the police department, which is, you approve policies, why are they writing policies for the police department? If we come up with a policy within the police department as to how we're gonna handle it, that's more appropriate.
It's because we believe that a certain rank is necessary for their appropriate training to do something like this.
So put that in the police department policy, not in the public policy, because you're regulating the police department.
But we don't have control of your policy.
Yes, you do. Every policy that I submit, you have 30 days.
Chief, this also isn't a policy.
There's a certain line of if you're asking us to tell you how to run your department.
This
What I'm
is a-
saying is we try not to do that because of your, but in this case,
It's a bylaw, not a policy.
that's where this is coming from. The town is saying people can't just come in and start looking for something to find unless they're of a certain rank where they definitely know what they're supposed to be looking
So
for.
maybe I should have determined what rank that would be.
Would you identify a different rank? Because you only have one rank lower than this.
Well, I mean,
You have patrolmen, sergeants, and up.
I discussed it, I'm just reading that we have sergeants, we have staff sergeants, maybe, usually it says the chief is designee, and we discussed what that means, but seeing that in there, that's overstepping in my opinion. I understand what you're trying to get at, and I agree with the concept, but writing it that way without consulting is overstepping, in my opinion.
Well, that's why it's a draft.
Why don't you?
This was
talk-
strictly a draft, so I appreciate your input. I don't mind continuing to work with you and see if there's a better language to put in.
Yeah.
Why don't you meet with Andrew and talk with him and try to see if we come up with something different and that can come back in front of us that we can all agree to. This is Andrew's draft, and we've already been giving input on it tonight, and that's why we've asked for more public input, because
Yeah.
we had our input already early in the evening, and we're asking for more input for exactly this reason. So, I mean, if you want to, meet with Andrew and discuss it more and put your opinion into it, certainly he can work on that, I'm sure, gladly, I would think, because we want everyone to be happy with it. But the intent of this is that it's not a policy, it's got a little more teeth, it's going to be an actual bylaw. So that answers part of it. It's beyond policy. This is going to be voted on by the town as the rule of law. Yes. Okay.
And then not as a change, but just as a clarification for information, how many off-premise liquor licenses are there in the town of Berry?
5.
So.
Right now, the minimum is 1 license.
And you're asking for a maximum of 1?
To start with, yes. Only for retail storefronts, not for all potential licenses of all types of trade.
Like I said, I just was looking for
Yeah.
clarification.
But technically, if it's 6, we need to have 2.
We have more open slots. So the minute one person opens up another package store in town, that's gonna go to 2 marijuana licenses, because 20%
And we have to
rounds
round
up.
The state says we can have no less than 20%.
So I'm just giving you the potential out there. Right now, we can go minimum, but we can't say 1. We can just say minimum 20%, because that's gonna change depending on the number of package store licenses issued.
How many package store licenses can we have, or liquor licenses?
What was
in the
it?
town? What's the,
We have 5, and I think we can do up to 9?
I haven't heard the latest one.
Not package stores.
What is that governed by?
That's
Population and
Yeah,
state
population
regs.
size.
But the way the state law is written, and we can't be more restrictive than it,
I
is
could
that
open up that
it's
email.
no less than 20%. So once you have 5, you're at 20% with 1. If you have 6, now you're, like 18%. So we'd be violation of the state law, so we have to permit a second one once we get store number 6. So store number 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, we'd have 2. And I don't think we'd ever grow more than 2, possibly on the permits for the alcohol, but.
Maximum, it was total amount. Let's see. 7 is the
7
absolute
is the
total.
total?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can have 1 or 2 more, and which would make it to a second retail shop. So that won't change, a maximum of 2. Right now, it's 1.
I haven't read the state law specifically to determine how they deal with the rounding, but I know that we presented it as, once you get over, you still got a minimum 20%, doesn't care about the fractions, so you can't do it with 1.
Anything else? I appreciate it. That's what we need is,
Yeah,
Questions
and
to
if
look at it.
more comes up, as you have more time to think about it, don't hesitate to send comments in through whatever avenue you can get them to us.
this was a pretty thorough first draft by Andrew, and I'm very appreciative that he put it together. He did a good
Yeah.
job on it. We haven't made a lot of complaints or alterations to it to this point at all, so it's a very good first draft. Thank you.
And if we could make sure that the planning board also gets a copy of that. We just got it today, Dennis, just so you know. It's not like we've been working on this for a week or 2. The licensing side, general bylaw we're talking about
Is
for,
that what this is?
yes.
Finished around 4:30 today, so.
So this was just more that discussion. Charlie or I are hoping to also be at your meeting tomorrow night so that we can continue working together. Okay, let's see. All right. I guess what I'll do right now, since I'm sure there's somebody here that may or may not have something they'd like to bring up, is open it up for any public comment, anything new that wasn't discussed. Yes, Chief?
Would you like to set the Halloween trick-or-treat times?
Sure. Is the event a 5 to 7:30?
So the Berry Scary is not necessarily the same thing as the trick-or-treat times. This
Correct.
isn't going to be our recommendation, but we just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to give you a recommendation.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Do you have a recommendation?
Yes, we do. So Berry Scary, we discussed with Andrew, is 6 PM to 7:30, which means we agree is a very good time. We just wanted to start the trick or treat at 5:30, so there's a little bit of time for kids to go south if they're gonna come up to the center of town.
Maybe go 5:30 to 8, give them a little on either side of it.
Well, if you wanna go that, we were gonna say 5:30 to 7:30, but that's all right, you can say 5:30 to 8.
I'd say, well, let's do 8.
In
Yeah.
tradition, we're going 6 to 8, I think, so we'll just open it half an hour earlier.
And we're just thinking, with everything being centered downtown, we wanna do Southbury, because I know a lot of people like to do both, from what I've heard. And the
Yeah.
kids are gonna be tired at 7:30, you know, might not, we still wait to go down.
Can you oppose to doing 5 to 8?
5 to 8.
Okay.
It is half day of school, okay, so the kids are all out early.
Yeah.
Okay. And technically, 5 to 8 just means what for everybody else that doesn't know it's 5 to 8? Like if somebody shows up at a door at 4:30 or 8:30, what's that mean by setting times? I just want to better understand what that
I
means.
think Charlie, I think just the way it is people do tend to respect that and turn their lights off at the time you tell them to turn it off. Really, that's what it boils down to.
And
Okay, no, and that's why I'm asking, because I don't know if somebody hears this and thinks like, oh, am I gonna get a penalty because I went out at 4:30 with my, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I think it's just, it's a guideline people follow and they turn their lights off and it's like,
Okay.
And I think, you know, the
I don't
5
have
o'clock's probably a
children.
good idea. I kind of like when it's dark and creepy for kids in Halloween, but especially with some little kids, it's still light at 5, and that might be good to give them a little time before it starts to get dark out. It doesn't really get dark till about, 6:15, 6:30. It gives younger kids a chance to get out there, I think, but it's not quite so spooky for them. I do have kids walk away every year. Unfortunate,
You get
but
a nice
fun.
dark backyard when the,
Well, we do it right on the porch, but it's enough, it's just creepy enough that the little ones might want to come earlier.
so, do we have a motion 5 to 8? What were we discussing?
Sure, motion to set trick-or-treating hours from 5 to 8.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye. 5 to 8. Anybody else?
Trunk or treat, we already said.
And thank you very much, Chief, for that.
I had something I want to bring up before we.
You guys got a lot of important things here on your plate. I wonder if you just got a few minutes so I could tell you about a situation in my home.
Of course.
Yes.
I live at 113 Fisher Road, which is off of Sunrise Ave. And I've been trying to get with the DPW about a water problem, groundwater problem brought down Fisher Road from Sunrise Ave. But they haven't had a meeting of late, and they've had a lot of work going on because of the weather. But they've brought water onto private property on Sunrise Ave a number of years ago. And when that person complained and had issues with the septic system, they asked them to rectify it. They brought it through that property to the next property behind him, and it caused an issue there. And that person asked the town to rectify it, and then they piped it down Fisher Road to Pleasant Brook, which is adjacent to my property. And the additional water overwhelms the culvert.
Let me interrupt you for one second.
Sure.
By saying they, I assume you mean the
The
DPW?
DPW,
So they're
yes.
bringing drainage pipe through of some sort, or what is it they're bringing through that's?
Groundwater from the, I've got a little bit of,
Before we get too far, I want to
Okay.
understand what we're talking about at the
yeah,
beginning.
there's
what exactly, how
groundwater
it got here.
accumulating on the west side of Sunrise Ave at the curve opposite Fisher Road.
Okay.
There was a culvert that emptied the water onto the Haynes property, and it just ran above ground there
Now that puts it on the east side.
on the east
The-
side.
Okay, thank you.
And like I say, the Haynes needed a new septic system. They wanted the water problem addressed, so they piped it through their property to Dylan's property, Horsefield, which is along Fisher Road. When that became a problem for her, it was put into a pipe that had been laying on the north side of Fisher Road unused. And it was piped below ground down towards Pleasant Brook, which is adjacent to my home. All that additional water goes into Pleasant Brook upstream of the culvert that goes under Fisher Road.
I guess it's backing up and
And
draining out of
it
there.
backs up into my yard. It affects, it doesn't allow my perimeter drains to continue to run, and it floods my basement.
That culvert goes under a road, or where's the culvert that it gets?
Which,
You said it's upstream from a culvert which can't handle it, and that's what backs up.
Yep.
What's the culvert go under?
Fisher Road.
Under Fisher Road.
Yep.
So
I've got a-
probably the proposal would be to try to enlarge the size of that
Well,
culvert.
we,
pipe going under.
Jason, in '09, this has been going on for a while. In '09, we requested that something get done about it, and Jason Pimentel, with the DPW department, put an additional culvert in to try to accommodate them additional water, but it's been ineffective,
Fisher's an unpaved road, correct?
yes. So I've got a little
That makes
drawing
it
here.
easier to deal with when we do have a meeting with them, but yeah, we haven't had a meeting in a while. And where's it going
Thank
on the
you.
other side of Fisher Road? Is it in the pipe, or is it just gonna make another problem?
So it's coming, here's Sunrise Ave, comes onto Haynes's property, piped through. And then there's some collection means here, I'm not sure exactly what happens here, but then it's piped across Fisher Road. And this pipe had been laying here unused since I've lived there. And then in '09, more or less, it was utilized and brought down this side of the road. And it enters, it was running right above ground, right into the brook, upstream of the culvert.
Or just dug culvert above ground? Dug open culvert or pipe?
Pipe.
Okay.
Yep. And so, as I said, Jason Pimentel, when we asked him, he was very good about it, he tried to help us. And they put in another 14-inch diameter culvert here with a stone berm intended to direct it into that culvert. But this doesn't work, it washes right over the berm, the excess water. Some water, of course, does go through that culvert, but a lot of it comes over this berm and continues to come into Pleasant Brook. It all backs up here, and my perimeter drain ends up underwater. And then I get water in my
And that's a
basement.
36-inch culvert already into that road?
Yes,
Wow.
30 or 36?
36.
That's a lot of capacity to back up.
I'm not an engineer, but I know it's not working.
So just so I better understand when I'm looking at
Maybe
this,
you can
here's
double the
Sunrise.
36 inch. I mean, that's pretty easy. The
This
dirt
is
road,
Sunrise, this is
bury-
Fisher
bury the
Road.
concrete and keep going.
Okay.
This is up towards the top of the hill of Sunrise, right? Not down by 62?
Yes, it's,
They're easy
if you were
to-
coming from
they're easy to
Farrington,
do.
Yeah.
They're easy to do.
you come
because-
around.
Down by the schoolhouse number 4?
Yep, so you come in Sunrise Ave there,
Yeah.
you come across and it turns to the left and comes downhill,
Dig down a
Mm-hmm.
then
certain
it turns
depth,
hard
bury a
right.
culvert underground.
Okay, so
And this is a gravel road right at the corner.
this is to 62, that's
Yep.
back to Farrington.
And it's something.
Okay,
organized.
thank you.
Yep. Now, this is a little timeline of whatever, as we know it.
Okay.
Put a second 36 inch, dig it 4 feet down, so it fits on the gravel.
And I've got photos and everything. I meant to bring all this information to the DPW board.
And that would have to be probably.
They had one scheduled for October 9th, but I guess it was a default scheduling because of the holiday Monday previous to it. And it was, so I don't think they've really set a date for October. They haven't met since July
No,
7th.
we've missed a couple months.
Yeah.
I would think that a second 36-inch culvert would be an easy addition. We'll have to talk to Jason about it. Certainly, it wouldn't be a huge financial impact to Chapter 90. As I understand, when you put a culvert in, you put a certain depth of it below grade so that fish or things can still swim through with the gravel bottom in the pipe instead of an actual pipe. So it's very simple, the dirt road, to open it up, lay that culvert in, make sure it's buried properly underground enough, and double the capacity pretty easily. I don't know what they do to seal between the pipes offhand, but that's getting the semantics of what Jason knows how to do. But we have to ask him how difficult it is, but I'm sure it would be a minimal Chapter 90 hit if we wanted to put that into this year's Chapter 90 considerations before we get those too far along, you know?
The only thing I would need to double check, and I'm guessing you are maybe familiar, you've seen this, but the water levels on each side of that culvert, do they generally seem the same height?
No,
Okay, So it's acting like a dam?
It's acting like a dam. I
Okay.
have photos of it
That's-
going over the top.
Because then extra culverts wouldn't matter if it's the same height. It
That's a
means you
lot.
just got more water at a low point in,
Oh,
in geography.
The
That's why I was
diameter of
asking.
the culvert doesn't allow it to go
What
right
we're
on.
talking about is residual water that used to be able to spread over all these properties is now being collected and recollected and recollected, and there's acres and acres and acres is funneled down to one
Right,
point.
and then this is
Where-
all
where
up-
It was
uphill
allowed to
here.
flow with the land until it interfered with the new septic, because they weren't gonna pass the perk test. It wasn't an issue until then, and now it's an issue. So once you divert that one, now you've made an increase over here, and you push the problem downstream. It used to be surface water, which went over acres and acres of land, which is all dumped in one spot now.
So the question now is, where
What
does that
happens-
go?
right, what
Because
happens
we had another
downstream?
culvert, now what happens to the
Well,
next
this
house?
goes
Because
through-
apparently we thought we fixed something here,
But we need, yeah, we need to
and
see
so this is
where
the third time we're fixing where we're
we
sending
need
the
to see where
water.
brook goes to as well, but Jason will know that too.
This brook
If it's gonna-
goes across and crosses Everett Road near Kurt Wells' home,
Okay,
Kurt Wells' farm,
Mhm.
and then goes past that, and it
it's going to
crosses Route
62,
62. I'm not sure who owns the home,
feeds
but
into
it's
the
a home with a
burn
little
shirt
pond.
eventually.
You got
Right
some
at the
dam
edge of the
down there
road.
at 62, isn't it? That's not, they're not a dam,
There's a little pond at this, in this yard,
there's
this
a
front
proper
yard.
bridge and.
Yeah, there's a couple.
But there's a lot of wetlands down there, and I expect that area stays wet, and the water level hopefully is well controlled with the systems down there. Well, we certainly gotta consider that before we do anything with this. But it sounds like if he was trying to divert it here, that he's not worried about the water flow downstream, he was just trying to take some off of that. And that might have been an easier fix than doing another 36-inch culvert down here, but that might be the better solution. I don't know if it's better to do a second 36 and put a larger diameter.
My guess also is it depends on how many you put side by side, it may actually not work. Because then you gotta go deeper to get enough grade on top so that the concept of the 45-degree displacement of the soils and the pressures, you don't end up, it's kinda like taking a short 3-foot span bridge and saying, let's make it a 6-foot span bridge, but you don't put any structure in to carry the weight over it. Because the two round holes don't necessarily have the support to hold each other up. But one round hole surrounded by dirt and gravel does, because the pressures kind of balance out more like a pyramid. When you put two next to each other, it may not be able to carry the weight that you want on that road. So in other words, he might not be able to put it here. That's why he did the 14 here, not right next to it.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that engineering, when you get into it, sometimes it's not as easy to just say put in another 36-inch. pipe.
In my little synopsis of what's happened here, I suggest that because of the reoccurring problem, it should be looked at and assessed by an engineer, permanent, proper solution. I mean, you know, I understand that you guys got a lot of big issues in front of you, and this is a relatively small thing, but it's huge to me, if I have a flooded basement, you know.
No, we got something else going on in South Berry Plains area that I'm also getting
Yeah.
questions about. It pops up everywhere, because we do have plenty of streams and rivers, so anytime a road's involved in runoff, it's, yeah. And starting with something that was existing way back before somebody had a rule saying you had to deal with this a certain way.
Yeah.
Now that you've got an issue, we do need to address it. But it's not as easy to, like you said, there's a bigger picture that needs to be looked at so that we're just not revisiting your neighbor a year from now.
I understand that, yeah. The only thing I can tell you in regards to that is it is kind of season sensitive. I mean, if next spring, you know, if we get a lot of snow and there's a sudden melt next spring, so if something can get done between now and frozen ground would be best.
Okay. All right. Definitely should make sure we get this on the DPW Commission agenda and.
And the reason I
Come up with
came
a
here is
decision.
because the three of you are on that board as well.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
We are.
Yes. And highway stuff is more of kind of our jurisdiction when it comes to the sub-members. We're highway, then there's water and sewer, each have their own commission, so the detailed goings-on with each of the DPW departments is a little bit,
As far as the
Segregated.
culverts go, do a little quick math here, we could put in a second 36-inch culvert, or take it out and swap to a 50 couple inch. So a 54 inch would give you more volume than two 36 inch. So we could stay with one round. It would just have to be about 4.5 foot diameter. So that's not a huge change. We'd have to grade a little more up and down to it to accommodate it, but that would give you double the capacity by jumping to a 54 inch pipe.
Right, but what I'm concerned
but now
here
we
is
don't have
you've
the
got to
two.
come up.
Right,
You
you
can't
have-
go down with it.
Well, you have to go down some because you have to have a certain percentage buried, but I mean, yes.
What I mean
you gotta
though
come
is
up-
the
you gotta come up a foot.
diameter increase
Yeah, you gotta
is
come up a
only
foot.
beneficial for the part that's going up.
You
You
gotta
can't
come up-
count the part that goes down.
No, but the part you lose down is minimal compared to the width and everything else above. I'd say you're gonna come up about a foot and probably go down an extra half a foot.
Right.
Unless there's a ratio that you have to bury the pipe, I don't know that, but
Yeah, I got you
in
on that.
general, just taking the two pipe sizes, two 36s equals a 54, roughly.
Okay.
Probably a little less, more like a 52, so.
That
if
might be the right
if
approach.
If you had to pull it up a foot and you graded that away over 10 feet either side, it's a trivial grade. You know, it's an inch per foot grade. It's not very steep. One pitch is not much. So we could grade it up 20 feet, 10 on either side, and double the size of that capacity by putting a larger pipe in.
So we should have that
And
reviewed.
Easier than cribbing
Get some
two pipes,
details on
probably,
it.
but I don't know. Jason might say, oh, no, it's a lot easier to put a second 36 in. I don't know.
Right, I don't necessarily want easier, I want, let's not have to go back.
Well,
So, let's figure out what we can do. Maybe it is worth calling an engineer in to take a big picture and a small picture look.
I'd start with Jason. He may be more comfortable than an engineer. It may be something that I would think he's gonna be well-versed in and comfortable enough, and I trust him enough that I wouldn't require the engineer.
Of course,
if
we
he's
start with
comfortable
Jason,
it.
I'm just saying.
I think, yeah. This hopefully doesn't need to turn into a big project with an engineer and all that. Hopefully, and once again, we don't know, talk to the state too. If the state's gonna say, yes, you can go ahead and do that, or if they're gonna make further restrictions. I don't believe they will. It's not really a bridge. It is a buried culvert. I think it's less restrictive, but perhaps.
It's actually a lot less to do with DOT and a lot more to do with
DEP.
stormwater control.
Right.
So, and a lot of times they require engineering just for the downhill effect of where's the water going. So I don't know when they require it.
Yeah.
So,
I'll try
we
to
just
talk
gotta
to
look at the
them.
regs and make sure we follow whatever regs and then try to attempt to do the right thing to resolve the issue. So it's one step. We'll start with trying to get the discussions going at the DPW commission.
Do you have a meeting date set with them now?
They're trying to reschedule. Normally, we do it the second Monday of every month, but with the holiday and other issues that came up this month, it got pushed off again. And last I heard is they're looking to see how many of the commission members can make some date.
29th, I heard?
That might be when. I know they don't want to keep pushing it off,
Right.
but I also know that our board, well, you were here earlier, so you heard the fact that I got a meeting every night this week
Yeah,
already.
yeah.
So, I think that's part of the reason why it's been difficult.
Yeah.
But,
We need to have a meeting, certainly.
we all agree though, because we've already missed 2 in a row. So we got some catch up ourselves that we gotta get on top of, so I'm hoping that the 29th is gonna work.
Okay.
Keep your eyes posted.
On the website, the calendar?
Website will have it, that my town
You
government
can-
thing, you can always apply and they'll automatically email you when
I'm
meetings
sorry, what?
start and end.
If you go to the town website under the calendar
Yeah.
for each board,
Yep.
you can subscribe to updates through email every time that the agenda is posted,
Oh, okay.
and,
All right.
or canceled, one or the other.
Okay. All right, thanks for your time.
But thank you very much, sir.
Glad you brought that
Appreciate-
in.
Thank you.
Great.
You're not worthy.
Any further comments on that? All right,
Excuse me. I have a
Before we-
question, just a question, not a comment. okay?
was it on that subject?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it the town's responsibility if certain things occur and it damages a person's property? I mean, he was saying that some water from some.
I can really simplify the answer to that question.
Yeah,
You can't say unless you know the details of the subject matter. Is it something we built that created the issue, or is it something that was there and then someone else built and now are feeling the
I don't
issue?
know, that's a question.
That's why every subject changes. So we can't specifically sit here and say, is it the town's fault or not? Because what was there first, the culvert or the house? So that's what I mean, so you
I
can't
just hate
answer
to
that
see-
question.
I
It's
just hate
very
to see-
generic and too wide
I
open.
just hate to see someone's property being damaged and make it somewhat unusable based on seasons because of some arrangement of culverts that were done.
I agree,
purposely
Sam.
or
I don't think
by
anybody
mistake.
likes to see somebody's house get damaged because of that.
So I'm just speaking from that, I'm just speaking from that person's position that I think we, as an obligation, I think we need to do something to solve the problem as a
I
town.
think we just agreed to do that.
That information I gave you kind of spells out, as best I know, the years,
Okay.
how things took place.
All right, I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mike.
Time to review.
You got it.
Thank you very much.
Picking up. They said it would.
Correspondence. Received a letter to whom it may concern. We are writing this letter to extend our sincere gratitude to the town of Barry for donating the use of the Felton Field for our first annual Joe's Journey for Recovery 5K Run Walk. Our request was given with such a short notice, yet you welcome the opportunity to help us out. As a family, we strongly believe in this journey to help end the stigma of substance use disorder in our community. With your continued support, we would like to continue the request the use of Felton Field for our events going forward. It is our hope that we touch at least one life or one family that day, as we do not want any parent, sibling, grandparent, or any family member to feel the pain we feel every day from the loss of our Joe. We look forward to working with you in the future, and once again, thank you for your support. Sincerely, the family of Joseph Duval. All I can say in response to that, it was just my honor to do the little thing I could do. This was actually coordinated and run by so many other people. I know Q-Drug did a lot to help keep this, get it advertised, work with it. The Felton Field Commission actually is a little bit stronger in what you do at that field than we are. So that also is you got to reach out to those that supported it. I'll let the other board of select, but I was just glad that you asked and we had the ability to offer such a small little token of help.
I'm glad it was a good success. I stopped by myself
That's the
briefly
way,
and
I talked to Bobby and glad it went
Good event.
well. Talked to his dad.
It's I really appreciate what the people in this town do, especially with these type of events, because it really does help a lot of members of the community understand what's going on and the difficulties and trials that individuals and families go through kind of around this disorder. So thank you very much for, I work in Worcester, I used to live in Worcester, and you didn't see the same amount of outreach as you seem to see in this town. And I don't know if it's different population size makes it look different, but your efforts are felt here and you're seen here, and it's really appreciated. So thank you for the family for working towards creating this run, Q-Drug for your continued efforts throughout various many events and efforts and communications and that you've been doing. I just want to say thank you.
Can I add something?
Yes.
I participated in that. It was a well-run event. The Barry Police Department was very present there, and keeping the roads safe for everybody because we had to use public roads. But also, with his busy schedule, is the district attorney from Worcester, Mr. Early, came out and spoke, and that was very welcome. So he needs a nod for that as well.
Our state senator was also there. That was really appreciated. Andrew was there as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for those also showing. It makes a difference to see that people that aren't necessarily living in your backyard appreciate it and make the effort to come out. So, Selectman, do you have anything to report on?
I just have one issue to bring up, and that's our meeting this week
Yes.
at the
Thursday.
school department regarding New Braintree. And I don't know if we as a board had any expectations at this meeting. I personally, I've been to all the meetings with the group from UMass and heard all the arguments for and against closing schools and the whole bit. But I personally, I don't know if we're gonna be asked to give an opinion on this or what to expect.
I believe we are.
Yeah, and I don't wanna do that because I don't feel it's it's not our call, it's the school department's call. It's the school committee, that's what they're elected to do.
Yes and no. They make the decision,
No,
but they can't
it's-
do it without our approval.
This agreement actually requires us to participate in this decision now.
Yeah, but I think at the same time though, we're being kind of, well, put on the spot here. And I think we have to remember that I still feel closing a school is,
I hope that they're coming prepared to explain their process and their decision and the plans for the school, and that we're
Yeah.
gonna have input from the town, so we can make a well-informed decision. I hate to use the word assume, but I believe that we're going to be given a good presentation, I hope, on this matter. Certainly our schools, our elementary schools and the 5 schools in the district are, underattended greatly.
Mhm.
We could literally close 3 and fill 2 schools to capacity, but we're
Right.
not looking to do that.
Yeah.
So to say that the schools are averaging 20% of so capacity is, in any business models, is a poor way to spend money. Maybe they break the schools down like they're doing now and use certain grades in certain schools, so you have less staffing in the school and things. But still, you have the expenses of school, obviously,
Mhm.
heating oil, no small expense in electricity and things, janitorial staffs and things that have to be maintained. And I don't know how much benefit there is, in their very large cumbersome budget, I don't know really what kind of impact that makes to close that school down. And I'm hoping they'll present that to us as well.
Right.
Because that's part of making the decision. If it's really not making a decent impact on the budget, it may not be wise. And as Mr. Urban said last time, once the school's closed, it may be gone. They may sell it, they may utilize it for something else. It may not be available to us later if we need it. It would certainly be a lot more expensive to build a new school. Hopefully, we're gonna get a lot of information about this. And I believe, though, it is our responsibility to try to make an informed decision, and with the other towns as well. And we're not gonna find out till we go. Well, we can discuss it more here and be better prepared as a group for that.
Yeah.
I'm certainly in favor of that if we wanna spend a few minutes on it.
But I would hope that they wouldn't, maybe I phrased it the wrong way. If I did, I'm sorry. But I'm hoping that we don't get presented something real nebulous and then the whole decision falls exclusively on the 5 boards. Because I feel it.
They can't move forward without the 5
I
boards
understand they
approving
can't
that.
move forward, but they can certainly place a lot of
Mm.
some
Well,
of their burden. on-
What they can do, as I understand, without our permission, is not use the school.
Yeah,
So they can.
but I think you know what I'm.
Maybe they can't close it, but maybe they can refuse to use
Yeah.
it, shut off the water, cut the heat back to bare minimum, and just let the place sit there.
Yeah,
I don't know, but that's my thought. They could certainly play a hard game like that, but I don't think that's their intent. The school committee is people from our district that represent us.
Mhm.
And I would hope that they're trying to do what's in the best interest of the communities. We'll find out.
yeah, we're gonna find out, for sure.
It's my understanding that the school will not be able to be closed unless the town votes to close it. I was talking to some Oakham people, and they were saying
I
that
don't know.
was,
Yeah, I don't know if
That
they
would-
have
New
to.
Braintree also has to have a town vote, you're saying?
yeah. They said the school the towns can say, the other towns or the school committees can say, yes, we need to close the school, but then it has to go to the voters of New Braintree.
Yeah, that may well be. I don't know
That's what they were saying.
Well, originally, there was,
meeting.
I chaired the committee that wrote the
Right.
initial agreement, and there was language similar to that in there. I know it got changed by the
State
state.
overrode it, right.
I know they changed some of it,
Yeah.
which I don't believe they had a right to do, but that argument's gone. And I'm a little leery of this whole,
These are certainly things we should be finding out Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly the process, how it's supposed to happen, how they say it's supposed to happen. And how New Braintree feels about it's gonna make a difference in my vote on this, certainly.
yeah.
I got a couple questions on this. One is, has anybody read Article 11, I think, that they reference about this process being required to take the steps? Second of it, who's running the meeting? It's a meeting technically with the quorum of the boards of selectmen as well as representatives of the school district and the school committee. Who's the chairman? Who's running the meeting? Who's presenting the information? And are any votes expected, and what is the minimum vote required, things like that? I would like to know that info, partly because I don't want to show up, someone gives me a little flyer that says, we're gonna close New Braintree, we think we got some plans to do something about it, please vote. And I don't want to be in a meeting like that, feel like we're putting the pressure to make a vote, and not be able to sit there and say, we don't have enough information, we should table this and have another meeting because you didn't give us any information until the day of the meeting. Nothing has been sent to me saying, this is why we're doing it.
There's no agenda.
They just said, here's a meeting, the school committee voted to shut it down, so please, to take the next steps, you gotta show up here. Nothing sent to us about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they think that's gonna benefit the school district.
I believe the letter we received came from the superintendent. So it would lead me to believe.
Came
that
from
it's-
her office.
I would believe that it's her meeting, but
I think the
I
same
don't
person
know.
represents the school committee. So in other words, it's kinda like Sandy. She can be town administrator's assistant, she can be board of selectmen's assistant. I think Jessica Bennett sent out that communication representing the school committee, not necessarily the superintendent, but I'm not 100% sure. Could be in reverse. Could have been representing the superintendent, because, I don't know, you always hear from the superintendent, not the chairman of the school committee in communications. Well, historically, I haven't heard a lot from the school committee directly, it usually comes from the superintendent.
Right.
yeah, and the letterhead here does say Quabbin School District Committee on this page. So
And
it
both of
would,
them.
would be nice to know exactly who's hosting it, and,
Yes, Dennis.
I might be able to shed a little light on that. I can't quote exactly times, but Central Mass Regional Planning for more than a year was reaching out to communities to look at the elementary schools and town buildings to repurpose them for other things. They requested citizens to attend public meetings with that agenda, if you recall.
I do.
I'm almost wondering if there's, I'm not blaming Central Mass Regional Planning, so I don't misunderstand me here, but it seems like, from what I remember, Hubbardston's elementary school was on the block, as well as New Braintree. That's how I understood it. What to repurpose them for, that's what they're asking citizens to get involved with. I don't know if that equates into this meeting that's scheduled for that, if they're gonna be in
Not sure.
attendance in that. You may wanna find out what came of those meetings, and if those meetings, they have bigger plans for that building. Is that what maybe prompted it to be closed? I know money's always the issue, but it just seems coincidental. There was some things going on, and then this is happening, but I believe they tried to do it once before. They tried to regionalize New Braintree into Oakham or something.
they have
Right.
blended those two, but that's just, they're just doing that within the district. They're busing kids between the two schools.
I think what was happening this year is because one school is actually getting fixed or something. So temporarily, they had to move them all to one school, which may or may not be something they've done in the past or not, or if it was just the most recent memory, and thus why were they sending all the elementary kids to one school or not. Here's my understanding. This is what I've heard, but it's rumor, because I haven't heard it directly from one school committee member, and I haven't heard it directly from anybody that mentioned this meeting, is the idea is close New Braintree. There's a potential company out there, nonprofit,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I forget what age type teaching, that might be a disability type or some similar type teaching school. That it's like a private school that would come in and use the building, that CMRPC or the school district or someone's been talking about potentially having an interest in it. But until there was any confidence that the school district could actually say we can do this, going through this process, that third party that may want to use the building is also being non-committal. So in other words, it's like, there's a possibility here, but it's based on if we do this, but if we do this, it's because this is happening, not, so in other words, it's all or nothing. All the eggs land in the basket, or they all crack on the sidewalk, because nobody's committing to anything, because one won't commit until the other one's made the next step, and the next step is dependent on what are you gonna do if we do it. So that's all rumor, I've heard, and some stuff that was mentioned at a school committee meeting I saw on TV that referenced some of that in the same vague concept. And I'm not saying they're wrong to be vague, because I think there's a certain level of certain negotiations you do with stuff, you just can't be quite open in the public until you sign a dotted line, even legally. So I'm not saying that they're doing the right or wrong thing there, it's just I don't have that info. And also, I have heard previous administration people speak to concerns about the idea of parochialism and getting this is my town, so you can't take my town, and the identity and self-identity. But the thing that I would say that is the counter argument to that is, you don't need to have towns in the state of Massachusetts if you don't believe in parochialism. There's no reason to have separate town borders, ever, if you don't agree with that concept. So what happens now is you take the school from New Braintree, who's already got to be in mutual agreements with several other towns, with several different departments, and you undermine the fact that they are actually a town. You continue to take bits of the town away, so how close are they just to being the next Old Furnace, the old Wheelwright, the old Gilbertville, and become another subdivision of Hardwick or some other town? You got to think of that way, because if you take an elementary school away from a town, are you going to actually bring in families that are looking to have kids? There's no elementary school there. Why would they go to New Braintree instead of Ocam, Barry, any other town? So what you're doing is you're saying our neighbor can die in place and get absorbed by somebody else because we're going to take away something that would give them a reason to bring people into their town. So I'm just saying that's another side we got to look at, long term. It's easy to say it's going to save us some money in the next 5 years until our school district has to cover more costs, and I'm just thinking it out. Eventually you're going to undermine the town. So if we don't give them a little support, each bigger town undermines the next smaller town, and we're not the biggest town in our neighbors. Rutland's bigger than us. So it's a chain. If you would want Rutland to treat you better, you better think of how you treat New Braintree. So talk to the people from New Braintree and get an opinion of it, is all I'm suggesting before we go into that meeting and make any statements about what we think. Because what really matters right now is what does New Braintree think, because I don't think the savings is going to be a huge difference to their budget. They can say it is, but I just don't see the numbers balancing out based on what they're going to say.
Just in terms of process, it doesn't, the agreement doesn't specify who runs the meeting or anything like that, but in order to do the closure, they're going to need a 2/3 vote of the school committee, 2/3 vote of all the boards of selectmen. That triggers a single issue special town meeting in no more than more than 3 months, but no less than, but less than 6 months.
Okay.
And at that, special town meeting is like the
Final decision.
The final decision. So that's the process, so.
Would that only be in New Braintree?
Only in New Braintree.
The rest of the towns give New Braintree the final decision. But it doesn't even they can't even close it without the rest of the towns saying that you can put it on your ballot or warrant.
Given that we have quite a bit left to do this evening, and we do have a meeting on this Thursday, maybe we should move forward and
Well,
see what comes up. And
I'm
Yeah,
okay
just
with that.
play it.
I just wanted to get some input from people.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
And thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate it, Charlie. It was important. All right. We got some executive sessions, so if we do them, motion to move into with the intent to come out and not continue any further business, just to close. Somebody wants to present those motions?
find the reasons are going in here.
Second.
Make a motion, we move to
I thought you
executive
motioned.
session.
I thought he made the
No,
motion.
he-
No.
Nice meeting you, gentlemen.
Good night.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for
Motion to
attending.
move into executive session, Mass General Law 38, Chapter 21, Exemption 2, to discuss strategy with respect to the deputy chief, and also another topic under that session shall be to discuss strategy with respect to the police chief. And we will be retire from that section to come into regular session, only to adjourn.
Now I'll second.
Call for vote.
Aye. Greg
Aye.
O'Sullivan, aye, pardon me.
Matt Urban, aye.